Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Marcus Elwood. I'm 34 years old, and I've seen things in Vietnam that no man should ever have to see. Those memories follow me everywhere, in my dreams, in the faces of strangers on the street, in the backfiring of a car that sends me diving for cover. That's why I came here to the middle of nowhere in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. To get away from it all, I found this old ranger cabin for sale dirt cheap. Nobody wanted it because it's so far from everything. 17 miles to the nearest town. No neighbors, no noise except for the wind in the pines and the occasional animal call. Perfect. That's what I thought when I first saw it. Perfect. The first thing I did when I got here was set everything up to live on my own. I fixed the generator so I'd have some power, dug out the old well and set up a water filter. I built hunting blinds in the trees around the property and fixed up the old smoking shed behind the cabin to preserve meat. The root cellar under the cabin became my food storage, canned goods, dried meat, preserves. I even started growing some vegetables in a small garden patch. I was determined to need as little from the outside world as possible. For the first 3 months, everything was peaceful. I'd wake up with the sun, tend to my small garden, hunt when needed, and work on fixing up the cabin. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking at the stars. So many stars out here, away from the city lights. I started to feel like maybe I could heal out here. Maybe the nightmares would stop. That's when I first heard them, the whispers. It was a cold night in early September. I was about to head in when I heard it. Someone whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like it was coming from the tree line to the north. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight and checked it out, but found nothing. The next night I heard it again, this time from the east, then the west, the night after that. Always just quiet enough that I couldn't understand what was being said, but loud enough to know it was there. When I drove my old truck into town for supplies, I mentioned it to the guy at the general store. He got a funny look on his face. "Where did you say your cabin was again?" he asked, I told him, and his face got even more serious. "That's out in Hunger Valley," he said. "Folks around here don't go there much, especially not alone." I laughed it off. People in small towns always have their superstitions. But as I was loading my supplies, an old Native American man approached me. He had deep lines in his face and eyes that looked like they'd seen centuries. "You're the one living in the old ranger cabin," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right," I answered. He nodded slowly. "When the snow comes, be watchful. There's a winter spirit that walks like a man but hungers like a beast. The Ojibwe have known about it for generations." I thanked him politely and drove back to my cabin, shaking my head at the local folklore. I'd faced real monsters in Vietnam. Some old legend wasn't going to scare me. A week later, I found something strange while hunting, a deer standing upright against a tree. At first I thought it was alive, but as I got closer I realized it was dead, completely frozen solid. It was odd because the temperature hadn't dropped below freezing yet. Even stranger were the bite marks on its neck and chest, clean, precise, almost surgical. No animal I knew hunted like that. I told myself it was probably just some predator I wasn't familiar with, maybe a mountain lion with a weird hunting style, but deep down, something felt wrong about it. Then the storm hit. Late October, way earlier than usual, a massive blizzard dumped 4 feet of snow overnight. My truck was buried, and the narrow dirt road leading to my cabin was completely impassable. I was cut off much earlier than I'd planned. No big deal. I told myself, I've got plenty of supplies. I'll be fine until spring if I need to be. But that's when I started noticing the bone arrangements. Walking the perimeter of my property to check for storm damage, I found them. deer antlers, rabbit, bones, fox skulls, all arranged in perfect geometric patterns. Some were circles, others triangles, or more complex shapes I couldn't name. They hadn't been there before the storm, and someone, or something, had made them during the blizzard. My traps started coming up empty around this time too. I'd check them and find them triggered, but no animals inside. Game seemed to disappear from the woods. Even the birds stopped coming around. I'd sit in my hunting blind for hours and see nothing. It was like all the animals knew something I didn't. But the worst part was the hunger. It started as just feeling a little more hungry than usual. I'd eat my normal meals and still feel empty somehow. Each day it got worse. I'd eat double portions, then triple, and still feel like I was starving. I found myself getting angry over nothing, snapping at the walls, pacing the cabin like a caged animal. One night, as the wind howled outside and the hunger gnawed at my insides, I stood at the window looking out at the moonlit snow. For just a second, I thought I saw something moving at the edge of the trees. Something tall and thin that didn't move like a person, and I swear it was looking right at me. The snow kept falling for days. When it finally stopped, I went outside to check my property. That's when I saw the tracks. They circled my cabin completely, like whatever made them had been walking around while I slept. They looked almost human, but not quite right. Too big, about 14 inches long. The toe pattern was all wrong too, spread out in a way no normal foot would be. And they sank deep into the snow, deeper than they should have even for something heavy. I followed them for a while, but they just went in circles around the cabin before heading off into the woods. I didn't follow them there. Something told me not to. That night I woke up to strange noises from my root cellar. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight and went to check. The padlock was still on, just like I'd left it, but when I opened it, I knew someone had been inside. My carefully organized supplies were messed up. Raw meat that I'd hung to cure was placed on top of my canned goods. Some of my preserves had been opened and left to spoil. I checked all the windows and doors, but there was no sign of a break-in. No footprints in the snow except mine. It didn't make sense. You're losing it, Marcus, I told myself. Just the isolation getting to you. But I knew that wasn't true. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain. The next afternoon, I had my first blackout. I was sitting at my table cleaning my rifle when suddenly I was standing in the forest with no memory of how I got there. The sun was setting. According to my watch, 4 hours had passed, but it felt like just seconds to me. My boots were covered in snow like I'd been walking for miles. I hurried back to the cabin as darkness fell, that feeling of being watched, stronger than ever. My emergency radio was my only link to the outside world, now that the snow had cut me off. I kept it charged using the generator and would sometimes listen to weather reports or news. But that night, something changed. I turned it on to check the forecast, but instead of the usual station, I heard voices. Voices I knew. "He's out there all alone," said Wilson, who died when we stepped on a mine in the jungle. "Perfect target," replied Rodriguez, who'd been shot by a sniper 2 days before we were set to go home. "He's getting weaker," added Thompson, my best friend, who'd bled out in my arms after an ambush. They were all dead. I'd seen them die, but somehow they were on my radio, talking about me. I threw the radio across the room. When I picked it up again, it was playing normal weather reports like nothing had happened. My body started changing too. Foods I used to love now made me sick. The smell of cooked meat turned my stomach, but the scent of raw game made my mouth water in a way that scared me. At night, I could suddenly see better in the dark, picking out details that should have been invisible. My hands wouldn't stop shaking when I tried to eat normal food. Then came the storm, and the first time I saw it. The blizzard was the worst yet, snow blowing sideways and wind howling like a wounded animal. I was adding wood to the stove when something made me look up at the window. There was a face looking in at me, not a human face. It was tall, much taller than any man should be. Its face was stretched and gaunt, with skin pulled tight over bones. But worst of all were the antlers, like a deer's, but bigger and twisted in unnatural ways, growing right out of its skull. I blinked, and it was gone. Just the dark and the blowing snow outside my window. My food obsession got worse. I started measuring everything I ate, counting every calorie, convinced I was slowly starving, even though I had plenty. I'd catch myself standing in front of my food supplies at odd hours, just staring and calculating how long they would last. One morning I woke up freezing. The front door was wide open, snow blowing in onto the floor. I know I'd locked it the night before. Not just the normal lock, but the 3 heavy deadbolts I'd installed. There were wet footprints leading from the door to my bed and back again, like something had come in while I slept and just stood there watching me. That same day, while patching a leak in the cabin wall, I found it. A small, hidden compartment behind a loose board. Inside was a journal, the pages stiff and water-damaged but still readable. It belonged to the ranger who'd lived here before, a man named Collins. His entries started normal enough. Observations about wildlife, weather reports, maintenance logs. But as winter set in, they changed. He wrote about hearing whispers in the woods, about finding strange tracks in the snow, about a hunger that wouldn't go away no matter how much he ate. The final entries were barely readable, the handwriting becoming more erratic. It wants in. God help me, I think I'm letting it in. The hunger is all I am now. If anyone finds this, burn this cabin. Salt the earth. It doesn't just kill you, it becomes you. The last page had a crude drawing of a tall, thin figure with antlers. I threw the journal in the stove and watched it burn. The next morning, I packed some supplies and decided to leave, no matter how bad the snow was. I'd walk to town if I had. I set out at dawn with a compass and a map. I knew if I headed south, I'd hit the main road eventually. I walked all day, checking my compass constantly to stay on course. But as the sun began to set, I saw something through the trees that made my blood run cold. My cabin. Somehow, after walking south all day, I'd ended up right back where I started. I stood there, staring at my cabin, feeling sick to my stomach. How was this possible? I'd checked my compass every few minutes. I'd walked in a straight line south all day. There was no way I should have ended up back here. That night, as I sat by the stove trying to warm up, I heard a voice outside. "Marcus, help me, man, I'm hurt." It was Thompson's voice, my dead friend from Vietnam. I ran to the window and looked out. Nothing but darkness and snow. "Over here, Marcus, by the trees, I can't move." The voice came from the edge of the forest. It sounded exactly like Thompson, down to the slight Texas accent. But Thompson had died in my arms years ago. "Please, Marcus, I'm freezing out here." I grabbed my rifle and flashlight and opened the door. The cold hit me like a wall. "Thompson," I called out, my voice small against the vastness of the night. "Help me." The voice was fainter now, moving deeper into the trees. I followed it for a while, calling out, but it kept moving away. Finally, I stopped, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I realized what was happening. It was trying to lure me into the forest. I turned around and ran back to the cabin, not stopping until I was inside with the door locked behind me. Dasatum. Next day brought another blizzard, but this one was strange. I could see it through my windows, a wall of swirling snow surrounding my cabin, but nothing falling directly overhead. Like the storm was avoiding just the space where my cabin stood. When I tried to leave again, a few hours later, the storm intensified in the direction I was walking. When I turned back toward the cabin, it calmed. It was as if the weather itself was keeping me here. That's when things really started to get weird. Looking out my east window, I could see bright sunshine and clear blue skies, but my west window showed night, with stars visible and the moon rising. Impossible. But I was seeing it with my own eyes. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face, trying to clear my head. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection stared back, but not quite right. When I raised my hand, my reflection moved a second later. As I watched in horror, my reflected face began to change. My skin turned grey, my features stretched, and small bumps appeared on my forehead, like something trying to push its way out. I stumbled away from the mirror and knocked over a chair. When I looked down to pick it up, I realized I'd arranged my breakfast in a strange pattern that morning. Without noticing, the same geometric pattern as the bones I'd found outside. The hunger was worse than ever. I caught myself staring at my own arm once, wondering how it would taste. The thought made me throw up, but the idea wouldn't leave my head. That night, I had a dream, or a memory. I wasn't sure anymore. I was back in Vietnam, lost after an ambush. Our unit had been scattered. I hadn't eaten in days. I found Rodriguez's body. He was already dead. And I woke up screaming, the taste of meat in my mouth. Had it really happened? Had I really done that? Or was something planting these thoughts in my head? The next day, I decided to explore deeper into the forest, looking for answers. About a mile from my cabin, I found a clearing I'd never seen before. At first, I thought it was filled with statues. As I got closer, I realized what I was looking at. People. Frozen people. There were maybe a dozen of them, perfectly preserved, in the unnatural cold. Hunters by their clothes, but they were changed. Some had grey skin, some had elongated limbs. Several had antlers growing from their skulls at different stages, from small nubs to full racks. All of them had the same expression of horror and hunger frozen on their faces. I ran back to the cabin, packed a bag, and tried to leave again. This time I didn't even make it to the forest edge before becoming hopelessly turned around. I kept ending up back at the cabin no matter which direction I went. I was trapped. That night, I read through the ranger's journal again. Somehow, it was back on my table, unburned. I was sure I'd thrown it in the stove, but here it was. I read it more carefully this time, all the way to the end, where the writing got really crazy. "It's not changing me," the ranger had written. "It's using me. A host, a parent. It plants its seed in your mind, feeds it with your hunger, grows it with your fear, and when it's ready to be born..." The last pages were filled with drawings of the Wendigo. That's what he called it. The winter spirit from the Ojibwe legend, along with notes about previous victims dating back decades, all in this same area. I put down the journal and realized with horror that I could hear myself moving around in the forest outside. But I was sitting in the cabin. How could I hear myself out there? I ran to the window and saw a figure moving among the trees, tall, thin, with the beginning of antlers. It turned and I caught a glimpse of its face. It was me, but not me. A version of me that had given in to the hunger. Then the real Wendigo stepped out from behind a tree, much taller than my other self, with massive antlers and skin like old leather stretched over bones. Its eyes were black pits that seemed to swallow all light. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't an animal. It was hunger itself, given form. Starvation. Madness that had existed in these woods for centuries, passing from host to host, growing stronger with each new vessel, and now it wanted me. I woke up on the floor of my cabin, sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment I thought maybe it had all been a nightmare, but the pain in my body told me otherwise. My joints ached like they were being pulled apart. My skin felt tight and wrong, like it didn't fit me anymore. When I got up and looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My face was thinner, my cheekbones sharper, my teeth felt different in my mouth. Pontier. And there they were, 2 small bumps on my forehead, right at the hairline. The beginning of antlers. I screamed and punched the mirror, shattering it. The broken pieces showed multiple reflections of my changing face, like I was becoming several different things all at once. That's when the memories started flooding in, but they weren't my memories. I saw the forest 100 years ago, when the trees were younger and a different ranger lived in this cabin. I watched through the Wendigo's eyes as it stalked him, tormented him, and finally took him. I felt the hunger that drove it, the endless aching need that could never be satisfied. I saw dozens of other victims over the decades. Hunters, hikers, people who came to these woods and never left. I saw how the Wendigo had been playing with me all along, manipulating everything from the moment I arrived. The whispers, the bone arrangements, the spoiled food, all part of its plan to weaken my mind and make me a suitable host. I tried to fight it. I really did. I tried to think about who I was, to hold on to my humanity, but the hunger was so strong now. It felt like my stomach was eating itself. No amount of food would help. I knew what I was really hungry for, and the thought of it both disgusted me and made my mouth water. My perception began to change too. I could suddenly sense things miles away. I could feel the heartbeats of animals in the forest. I could smell fear, and then I felt them. People, 3 snowmobiles heading in my direction. A family who had taken a wrong turn in the storm and were desperately looking for shelter. A man, a woman, and their teenage son. I knew exactly where they were, though they were still miles away. I could feel them getting closer. 2 parts of me fought then, the human part that wanted to warn them, to save them, and the other part, the growing Wendigo part, that saw them as food. I grabbed my coat and headed outside, not sure which part of me would win. As I stood there in the snow, the original Wendigo appeared at the edge of the forest. It was holding something in its long, bony fingers. My dog tags from Vietnam. It approached me slowly, those black pit eyes fixed on mine. Then it placed the dog tags on the ground between us, along with my wallet, my watch, and the photo of my parents I kept by my bed. All the things that connected me to my human life. Dish. Wendigo pointed one long finger at the items, then at me, then back at the forest. I understood what it meant. I had to choose. I felt the family getting closer, maybe 10 minutes away now. I stared at my possessions in the snow. I thought about the people I once loved, the man I once was, and I felt the hunger tearing me apart. Inside, I took a step towards my things. The Wendigo watched, motionless. I took another step, and then I heard the snowmobiles. What happened next is hard to describe. My body changed in ways that should have been impossible. My arms and legs stretched, growing longer, stronger. My skin hardened and turned grey like old bark. The bumps on my head burst through in a rush of pain, growing into antlers that branched toward the sky. I moved without deciding to move. One moment I was by my cabin, the next I was deep in the forest, running faster than any human could. I leaped over fallen trees and crossed frozen streams in single bounds. I could move so quietly that animals didn't notice me until I was upon them. I reached the frozen lake and saw the family on the far shore, their snowmobiles stuck in deep snow. They were arguing about which way to go. The father pointed at smoke rising from my cabin's chimney in the distance. I slid into the icy water and moved beneath the surface. I didn't need to breathe anymore. The cold didn't bother me. I glided through the dark water like a shadow. When I emerged on their side of the lake, the original Wendigo was waiting for me. It held out its hand, offering me something, a piece of meat. I knew what it was. I knew who it had come from. One of the previous victims. The Wendigo gestured for me to eat, its black eyes boring into mine. In them, I saw images of starvation. Throughout history, in these woods, Native Americans trapped by harsh winters, fur trappers cut off from supply lines, lost hikers in modern times, all of them eventually driven to the same desperate act to survive. The hunger isn't just for flesh. I realized it's for life itself. The need to survive at any cost, even your own humanity. I took the meat. As soon as I swallowed it, the original Wendigo changed. Its body began to crumble, like ancient paper burning away. The antlers fell from its head and shattered on the ground. The black eyes faded until there was nothing left but ash blowing away in the winter wind. I understood then. It had passed its essence to me, its hunger, its purpose. I was the Wendigo now. The animals in the forest knew it too. As I moved back toward the stranded family, I noticed deer freezing in my presence, birds falling silent, rabbits offering themselves up instead of running away. They knew their place in this new order. I stood at the edge of the forest, watching the family try to dig their snowmobiles out of the drift. I could hear their heartbeats. I could smell their sweat and fear as they realized the sun was setting and they were lost in the wilderness. I could sense things about them that I shouldn't know. The father had a weak heart. The mother was secretly planning to leave him in the spring. The son had been in a fight at school and was still hiding the bruises. I stepped out of the trees, still hidden in the growing shadows, and made my choice. 2. Hunt had begun. Spring came slowly to the Upper Peninsula. The snow melted inch by inch, revealing the dead grass beneath. As the days grew longer and warmer, something changed in me too. The hunger faded. The antlers that had grown from my skull shrank back, disappearing completely as the last snow melted. My skin returned to its normal color. My joints shifted back to human proportions. Looking in the mirror, I was Marcus again, thinner, paler, with haunted eyes, but human, at least on the outside. Inside, I knew it was still there, sleeping, waiting for the cold to return. When the road finally cleared enough for vehicles, a police car made its way to my cabin. They'd been trying to reach me for months, they said. People in town were worried after I'd stopped coming in for supplies. I told them I'd been snowed in, but had plenty of food stored up. They looked around the cabin, noted how clean and organized everything was, and seemed satisfied. They found nothing suspicious. They didn't check the frozen meat in my storage shed. They didn't look for the family whose snowmobiles were now buried deep in the lake. They didn't know about the other bodies preserved in the snow, carefully hidden throughout my territory. I smiled and thanked them for their concern. They invited me to come into town sometime soon, and I promised I would. After they left, I found a leather-bound journal I didn't remember owning. Inside, in my handwriting, was a detailed account of everything that had happened during the winter. As I read it, chunks of missing time came back to me. The hunt, the feeding, the rituals of preserving meat in the snow. I should have been horrified. Instead, I felt nothing, just a quiet acceptance and the knowledge that I would need to be more careful next winter. As summer approached, I finally drove into town. Everyone was surprised to see me, commenting on my weight loss and pale complexion. I explained it away as a rough winter and some health issues I was working through. I visited a doctor in a larger town farther away, claiming 6 months of missing memories. They ran tests, found nothing physically wrong, and diagnosed me with dissociative amnesia caused by PTSD from my war experiences. They prescribed medication I never took and therapy I never attended. By late summer, I was almost able to pretend I was normal again. I fished in the lake, tended my garden, and made repairs to the cabin. Sometimes I could go whole days without thinking about what waited inside me. But as the leaves began to change in September, I felt a shift, a restlessness, a need to prepare. I found myself volunteering at a veterans support group in the nearest big town. I listened to the stories of men and women like me, damaged by war, looking for peace. I heard myself suggesting a retreat, a place to heal away from the pressures of society. I know a beautiful area, I would tell certain ones. The ones who were alone, the ones no one would miss right away. Very peaceful, very remote. I could show you sometime. Some took me up on the offer. I guided them to perfect spots throughout the valley, never too close to my own cabin, places where they could build or set up camp, places I could easily reach when winter came. With the first snowfall in late October, I felt it awakening inside. Me, the hunger, the awareness, the connection to the forest that had become my territory. I began setting up markers again, bones arranged in geometric patterns to establish boundaries. I prepared my cabin, reinforcing doors and windows, not to keep things out this time, but to keep myself in when necessary. As the transformation began again, I didn't fight it this time. I understood now. I was part of something ancient, something that had existed in these woods since before European settlers arrived. Through the growing Wendigo consciousness, I could access memories of all who had come before me, centuries of vessels stretching back to the first starving trapper who committed the taboo act of consuming human flesh to survive a brutal winter. Learn to control it better this time, to direct the hunger rather than be controlled by it. I created my food caches methodically, preserving my kills in the supernatural cold that I could now generate at will. Stories began to spread in the surrounding towns. Hikers gone missing, strange sounds in the forest at night, animals behaving oddly. People spoke in hushed tones about the Hunger Valley monster and warned their children to stay away from the deep woods. Good. Fear would keep most away and draw the curious closer. By midwinter, I existed in perfect balance with the thing I had become. During the day, I was mostly human, tending my cabin and planning my hunts. At night, I transformed fully, roaming my territory, protecting it from intruders or adding them to my food supply. 5 years passed this way. Summers human, winters as the Wendigo. Each cycle, I grew stronger, more in control. The transformations became easier, less painful. I expanded my territory, marking new boundaries each season. Then one day, watching from the forest edge, I saw a truck pull up to my old cabin. I'd moved deeper into the woods years ago, building a new dwelling that better suited my changing needs. The cabin had stood empty, a perfect lure. A man got out of the truck. He moved like I once had, scanning the surroundings, alert to threats, shoulders tense with the weight of memories. Another veteran, seeking solitude, seeking healing. I watched as he walked around the property, peering in windows, checking the structure. His face lit up when he found the "For Sale" sign I'd placed by the driveway, complete with a phone number that would reach a fake realtor who would offer him an unbelievably good price. As he made the call, I smiled from my hiding place among the trees. My antlers, now permanent even in my semi-human form, scraped against the low branches. I didn't mind. He couldn't see me yet, but he would. When the time was right, the cycle would begin again. A new hunter would become the hunted. A new vessel would be prepared, and the ancient hunger that lives in these woods would continue as it always has, as it always will. Winter after winter, hunger after hunger, forever. My name is Eleanor Thorne. I'm 42 years old, and my husband James died 3 years ago. Just when I thought life couldn't get any lonelier, I got a letter saying I inherited 80 acres of woodland in West Virginia from my great-aunt Mabel. I never even met her. The lawyer said she lived alone for over 60 years in those woods, which seemed crazy to me at the time. I remember driving up the narrow dirt road for the first time, trees closing in on both sides like they were watching me. The cabin was a mess, roof half caved in, porch sagging, windows broken, but something about it felt right, like it was waiting for me. This is mine now, I whispered to myself, running my hand along the weathered wood. A fresh start. It took me 4 months to fix up the place. I surprised myself with how good I became at doing things with my hands. I installed a rainwater collection system, set up solar panels for heat and a little electricity, planted gardens full of vegetables, and even got some chickens and goats. I named each goat after a character from my favorite books: Lizzie, Jane, Charlotte. The chickens I just called the ladies. The town nearby, Hollow Creek, was tiny, just 312 people according to the peeling sign on the road in. Everyone was polite when I went in for supplies, asking how the renovation was going, commenting on the weather. Mrs. Wilson at the general store always slipped an extra candy in my bag for the road. Sheriff Cooper tipped his hat whenever he saw me. The librarian, Miss Abernathy, saved books she thought I'd like, but no one, not once, accepted my invitations to visit. "Oh, that's mighty kind of you, Eleanor," Sheriff Cooper said when I invited him for dinner, his smile not reaching his eyes. "But I've got responsibilities in town. Maybe another time." There was always an excuse. Their car wasn't working right for the drive up. They had family visiting. They didn't like to be out after dark on that road. It was the children who first made me feel truly uneasy. I'd find things at the edge of my property. Little dolls made of corn husks with black thread crossed over where their eyes should be. Tiny log cabins whittled from sticks, their doors carved but impossible to open. Animal figures with claws 3 times too long for whatever creature they were supposed to be. Just kids playing, I told myself, collecting them in a basket I kept on the porch. But I noticed how carefully they were placed, always exactly at my property line, always facing my cabin. One autumn day, while looking for mushrooms deep in my woods, I found something that made my skin prickle. 7 stones, each about waist high, arranged in a perfect circle in a small clearing. They weren't just piled there, each was carefully balanced on its end. I walked around them, noticing how they lined up with the rising sun. Someone had put real effort into this. I asked about it in town the next day while buying seeds at the garden store. Stone circle on the old Thorn property? Mr. Reed, the owner, exchanged a look with his wife behind the counter. Probably just hunters marking something. Hunters using standing stones, I pressed. "Folk around here have their ways," Mrs. Reed said, suddenly very interested in rearranging seed packets. Old ways. That night, I went to the county records office website and looked up the history of my property. What I found kept me awake until dawn. 7 previous owners in the last 100 years. Each one stayed exactly 7 years before abandoning the place. No records of where they went afterward, just gone. The next full moon, my animals went crazy. The chickens wouldn't go into their coop, just kept running in circles. The goats, usually so gentle, rammed against their fence until their horns bled. I had to lock myself in the cabin that night, listening to them carrying on. When morning came, they were all calm again, like nothing had happened. While walking my property line that week, marking it with little flags for a fence I wanted to build, I found something that made my hands shake. Bones, hundreds of tiny animal bones buried just below the surface. They formed a perfect circle around my entire 80 acres, like someone had taken the time to create an unbroken ring of death around the property. I was cleaning my porch, trying to forget about the bones, when a truck I didn't recognize rattled up my driveway. An old man with a white beard and overalls climbed out slowly, leaning on a hand-carved walking stick. I recognized him from town, Morris Jenkins, who ran the hardware store. "Miss Thorne," he nodded, not coming closer than the front step. "Brought you these?" He held out a small cloth bag. Inside were strange little objects, a bundle of dried herbs tied with red thread, a small mirror wrapped in horsehair, an iron nail hammered into the shape of a spiral. "What are these for?" I asked. Morris looked past me into the trees. "Some lands have appetites all their own, Miss Thorne. Been meaning to bring these by since you moved in." "I don't understand." "Hang them by your doors and windows," he said, already walking back to his truck. "Inside, not outside. Mr. Jenkins, what? I've said more than I should already." His eyes met mine for the first time, filled with something like pity. "Been good knowing you, Miss Thorne." The first snow came early that year, a light dusting that covered everything in white. I woke up before dawn and saw something through my bedroom window that made my heart stop. Tracks in the snow. Big tracks circling my cabin. Not normal animal. Tracks. They walked on 2 legs. Each print was huge, nearly 7 inches across, with claw marks at the tips that dug deep into the ground. I stood at my window for a long time, watching the sun rise over those tracks. Whatever made them had walked around my cabin all night in perfect circles, and somewhere in my mind I remembered the children's little carvings with their exaggerated claws, and I knew I wasn't as alone on this land as I thought. I tried to convince myself those tracks were just from some strange animal passing through. Maybe a bear walking funny, but deep down I knew better. 3 nights after finding those tracks, it started with my chickens. I woke up to a strange silence. Usually my chickens make little cooing sounds even before dawn. But that morning, nothing. I threw on my boots and ran outside in my nightgown. All 12 of my chickens were dead, laid out in a neat row, all facing east toward the sunrise. Each one had a single small hole in its neck, no bigger than a pencil tip, but there wasn't a drop of blood anywhere. Not on their white feathers, not on the ground. Something had drained them completely dry, but left their bodies perfect and clean. I buried them all that morning, my hands shaking as I dug the holes. The next night, my 2 ducks disappeared. The night after that, I found my rabbit hutch open and empty. The strangest thing was how quiet it all happened. My dog Rusty, usually so alert to any strange sound, never barked once during the nights my animals were taken. One evening, about a week later, I was gathering firewood at the edge of my clearing when the hair on my neck stood up. Someone was watching me. I could feel it. I turned slowly and saw it, a shape standing exactly at the tree line, about 100 yards away. The sun was setting behind it, so I could only see its outline. But what an outline it was. It stood on 2 legs like a person, but it was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen. Its head wasn't right either. Even in shadow I could tell it was shaped wrong, long in the front like a dog's snout, sitting on what looked like human shoulders. I dropped my armful of wood and ran for the cabin. When I looked back from my porch, it was gone. That night I tried calling Sheriff Cooper on my landline. The phone made a weird noise, then went dead. The next morning, I found the phone line cut where it connected to my cabin. The cut looked like it had been made by teeth. My truck wouldn't start either, though it had been running fine the day before. When I opened the hood, I found claw marks on the battery cables. I tried my emergency radio, turning through every channel. On each frequency, I heard the same thing. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to go on forever. I threw the radio across the room. That night I had the first dream. I was running through my forest, but not on 2 legs. I was on all 4s. My hands and feet somehow changed into strong, clawed paws. I could smell everything. The mice hiding under fallen logs, the owl watching from the branches above, the fox that had passed through hours earlier. I woke up on my cabin floor, dirt under my fingernails, pine needles in my hair. The dreams kept coming. Night after night, I'd find myself hunting through the woods on 4 legs, catching small animals in my teeth, carrying them to a moonlit clearing and laying them out in patterns. I'd wake up exhausted, with scratches on my arms and legs that I couldn't explain. One afternoon, while fixing a loose floorboard in my cabin, I discovered a small hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside was a stack of journals, their pages yellow with age. Each one was written by a woman who had lived in this cabin before me. The oldest dated back to 1923. I stayed up all night reading them. Each woman described the same things happening. The animal deaths, the sightings of tall creatures with dog-like heads, the dreams of running through the forest. Each journal ended abruptly after 7 years. The last entry in my great-aunt Mabel's journal was simple. They're coming to collect me tonight. The 7th cycle is complete. After that, I started noticing how something was testing my cabin. Every morning, I'd find new claw marks around my windows, door handles that had been turned, the cellar door left slightly ajar when I knew I'd locked it. My things started disappearing, then reappearing in impossible places. The locket with my mother's picture vanished from my bedside table, only to turn up 3 days later, buried in my garden, 6 inches deep in the soil. My reading glasses disappeared from the kitchen counter, and I found them later balanced perfectly on the edge of my roof. One morning I woke to find my winter boots arranged in a star pattern in a clearing 50 yards into the woods. Then came the night of the big storm. Rain pounded against the cabin like it wanted to get in. Lightning struck, so close that my windows rattled. During one bright flash I saw them, dark shapes standing in a circle around my property just beyond the tree line. 7 of them, all standing on 2 legs, all with the same wolf-like heads on human-shaped bodies. They seemed to be signaling to each other with movements of their arms, never stepping past the boundary of my land. The next day was when time first went wrong. I was sitting on my porch watching the sun rise. I blinked, and suddenly the sun was high overhead. I blinked again, and it was setting. But the moon, which I could see faintly in the daylight sky, never moved at all. My watch ran forward 3 hours, then backward 2, then stopped altogether. I was hanging laundry later that week when a young girl appeared at the edge of my property. She couldn't have been more than 16 with long brown hair and Jenkins eyes. I recognized her as Morris Jenkins' granddaughter, though I'd only seen her once or twice in town. "Miss Thorne," she called, not stepping onto my land. "Grandpa doesn't know I'm here." "What is it, honey?" I asked, walking closer but noticing how she backed up when I approached. "I needed to warn you about this place." Her eyes darted around like she was afraid of being overheard. "Grandpa says this land doesn't just have owners, it has embodiments. What does that mean? Your great-aunt Mabel? She isn't gone." The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's still here, just wearing a different skin now." Before I could ask, "Anything else?" she turned and ran back toward town, disappearing among the trees. That night, I sat on my porch with a shotgun across my lap, waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for exactly, but I knew something was coming. The moon rose full and bright above my cabin, and in its light I saw movement at the edge of my property. A figure emerged from the trees, tall, fur-covered, walking on 2 legs but shaped all wrong. Its face was like a wolf's, but the eyes that caught the moonlight were too intelligent, too aware. It stopped at my property line, raised its long snout to the moon, and let out a howl that made my bones vibrate. The sound wasn't just loud, it was ancient, like it carried all the wild, dark history of these mountains in its voice. And the worst part was, something deep inside me wanted to howl back. I didn't sleep that night after seeing the creature. How could I? I sat with my back against the cabin wall until sunrise, the shotgun still in my lap, though something told me it wouldn't do any good against whatever was out there. The next morning, I drove my truck into town. It started perfectly, like nothing had ever been wrong with it. Strange how problems seemed to fix themselves when I was trying to leave. At the town library, I asked Miss Abernathy if she had any books on local history, specifically about my property. "Why the sudden interest, Eleanor?" she asked, her eyes not meeting mine. "Just curious about my family," I said, "about my great-aunt and the women before her." She hesitated, then led me to a back room filled with old records. "Your mother's family goes back a long way here," she said quietly. "All the way to the first settlers." I spent hours going through dusty folders and yellowed papers. What I found made me feel sick to my stomach. Every woman in my direct maternal line had lived on that same piece of land at some point in their lives. Every single one. They were all listed as territory keepers in the old town records, and all of them had died or disappeared on the property, When I got back to my cabin that evening, a deer stood in my front yard. It didn't run when I approached. Instead, it stared at me with eyes that seemed too knowing, then deliberately walked a few steps toward the forest, stopped, and looked back at me. It wanted me to follow. Against all better judgment, I did. The deer led me deeper into the woods than I'd ever gone before, to a clearing I'd never seen. In the center was the stone circle I'd found months ago. But now, in the center of the circle, something was digging its way out of the ground. I froze as a hand broke through the dirt, an old woman's hand with long, twisted fingers. Then an arm, a shoulder, finally a head. My great-aunt Mabel, exactly as she looked in the one photograph I had of her, pulled herself from the earth and stood before me, dirt falling from her ancient dress. "You're not real," I whispered. "I'm as real as the ground beneath your feet," she said, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "I am the ground beneath your feet. What do you want from me?" "It's not what I want, child. It's what the land wants. What it's always wanted." She gestured. "Around us. Protection. Containment. Continuity. I don't understand." "You will." She pointed to the largest standing stone. "Dig there. Find my final journal. Then you'll know why you're here." I blinked, and she was gone. The deer, too. I was alone in the clearing with the stone circle. I ran back to my cabin, grabbed a shovel, and returned before I could change my mind. The soil beneath the stone was soft, like it had been recently disturbed. 2 feet down, I found a metal box. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the name Mabel Thorne stamped on the cover. I read it by candlelight that night, my hands shaking more with each page. The journal told of a pact made between my ancestors and something that lived in these mountains long before people came. The early settlers had been starving during their first winter. In desperation, they'd offered a deal to the ancient creatures that hunted these woods, protection from other humans in exchange for food and safety. But the creatures, which my great-aunt called the Guardians, required more than just land. They needed a human connection to this world, a physical form to help maintain the boundaries of their territory. They chose a woman from the Thorne family to serve as their link, their embodiment, as Morris Jenkins' granddaughter had called it. Every 7 years, the Guardians would test their chosen keeper. If she proved worthy, she would undergo the transformation and become part of the land itself, gaining long life and certain powers, but losing pieces of her humanity with each cycle. If she tried to leave before the 7th year, terrible things would happen to her and anyone she loved. My great-aunt had completed 7 cycles, 49 years of service. According to her journal, she had finally merged completely with the land, her physical form no longer needed. And now I'd been called to take her place. The winter solstice came the following week, the longest night of the year. I was washing dishes when I noticed something moving in my front yard. The alpha creature, the biggest one I'd seen, was arranging pine cones and stones in some kind of pattern. I watched through the window as it carefully placed each object. When it finished, it looked straight at me, those intelligent eyes meeting mine, and backed away to the tree line. Cautiously, I went outside. The objects formed a clear picture, a crude but recognizable drawing of my cabin with a female figure inside, surrounded by a circle. Outside the circle were 7 wolf-like shapes. Next to this was another image, the same female figure, but now outside the circle, with one of the wolf shapes inside the cabin instead. It was offering me a choice. That night I dreamed I was my great-aunt. I could feel her withered hands as if they were my own, see through her eyes. I walked through my cabin, but it was different, arranged the way she would have had it. I could access her memories, feel her thoughts. She had accepted her role. Long ago, had even come to find a strange kind of peace in it. I woke up to find myself standing in the stone circle, snow falling gently around me, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The next day, I noticed I could see better in the dark. I could hear the mice moving inside my walls. I could smell the fox that passed by my garden, though it was nowhere in sight. I was changing. During a particularly cold January night, I discovered something else. A massive oak tree in the center of my property that I'd passed hundreds of times suddenly looked different. Its bark seemed to form patterns, symbols I somehow recognized, though I'd never seen them before. Curious, I touched the largest symbol. A sharp pain stung my finger, and I realized the tree had cut me. A drop of my blood touched the bark, and the entire tree began to glow with a faint blue light. The ground rumbled beneath my feet. From every direction they came. The dog-headed creatures, at least a dozen of them, all converging on the tree. They didn't seem surprised to see me there. Instead, they formed a circle around the tree and began to move in a complex dance. Their movements so coordinated they seemed like one creature with many bodies. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt a strange sense of belonging. These were the guardians of my land, my guardians now. As spring approached, I found myself spending more time exploring the property's secrets. In a hidden corner of my land, buried beneath countless years of fallen leaves, I discovered a small root cellar I'd never noticed before. Inside were shelves, lined with boxes, each labeled with a woman's name. My mother's name, my grandmother's, great-grandmother's, all the way back to the first Thorn woman who'd lived here. Each box contained personal items, wedding rings, locks of hair, favorite, books, handwritten letters, the collected treasures of the women who had served as keepers before me. My great-aunt's box was the largest. Inside, I found photographs of her transformation over the years. In the earliest, she looked normal, like any young woman from the 1930s. But in each subsequent photo, spanning decades, she looked less and less human. Her eyes grew larger, her fingers longer, her posture more hunched. The final photo showed her standing among the dog creatures as if she belonged with them. Is this what waited for me? My answer came sooner than expected. 3 hunters trespassed on my land the next day, ignoring the no trespassing signs I'd posted everywhere. I watched from my porch as they hiked through my eastern field, shotguns over their shoulders, laughing loudly. The moment they crossed the property line, the wind picked up. Dark clouds gathered overhead, though the day had been clear just moments before. The ground seemed to ripple beneath their feet. And the plants. Dear God, the plants. The tall grass wrapped around the hunters' ankles. Tree branches bent down to block their path. Vines snaked across the ground toward them. Then the guardians appeared, materializing from between the trees like shadows coming to life. Not just 1 or 2, but all of them, moving with purpose and coordination I'd never seen before. Their howls filled the air as they surrounded the terrified men. I found myself running toward the commotion, my body moving without conscious thought. Words I didn't recognize poured from my mouth, not English, not any language I knew. The guardians stopped at the sound of my voice, their heads turning to me in perfect unison. The hunters took the opportunity to flee, crashing through the underbrush toward the road. The guardians watched them go, then turned their attention back to me. The largest one, the alpha, approached slowly. It reached out one clawed hand and pressed it against my forehead. Images flooded my mind, memories that weren't mine. Me as a small child, no more than 5 years old, visiting this land with my mother. The guardians watching from the trees, evaluating, selecting. My mother crying as we drove away, knowing what my future would hold. I had been chosen long ago. This wasn't chance. None of it was chance. I fell to my knees in the grass, the weight of understanding finally too much to bear. The Alpha Guardian stood over me, its massive form blocking out the sun. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of a car coming up my driveway. The first visitor I'd had in months. I stood frozen as a black SUV pulled up to my cabin. The guardians had disappeared into the trees, but I could feel them watching, waiting to see who had come. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Something about her face made my heart stop. "Mom," she called, looking around cautiously. "Mom, are you here? My daughter, my Sarah." But that was impossible. Sarah was only 7 years old. I'd spoken to her on the phone just a few months ago, hadn't I? "Sarah?" My voice cracked as I stepped out from the tree line. "Is that really you?" She turned, her eyes widening. "Mom!" She ran toward me, then stopped a few feet away, her expression changing from relief to shock. "What happened to you?" "What do you mean?" I reached for her, but she stepped back. "Mom, you've been missing for 22 years. Everyone thought you were dead." 22 years? That couldn't be right. I'd only been here for 3 years. I looked down at my hands and noticed for the first time how different they looked. The fingers longer than I remembered, the nails thicker, curved like claws. "Come inside," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." In the cabin, Sarah kept her distance, watching me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. "You disappeared when I was 7, she said. "Dad looked everywhere for you. The police searched these woods for months." "Sarah, that's not possible. I've only been here 3 years. After your father died, Dad didn't die until I was 19, Mom. Cancer." Her eyes filled with tears. "He never stopped looking for you." My mind reeled. Had I lost time somehow? The journals mentioned a temporal anomaly that preserved the keeper while the outside world aged normally. "But 22 years? How did you find me?" I asked. "I never stopped searching either. Last month I tracked down some old county records that mentioned this property was still in our family name. When I asked in town, people acted strange, but one old man, Morris Jenkins, finally told me you were here. Said you'd been here all along." I made us tea with shaking hands, trying to absorb what she was telling me. As we talked, I caught my reflection in the window glass. I looked different, my face thinner, my eyes larger, my teeth slightly pointed when I opened my mouth. How had I not noticed? That night, Sarah slept in the spare room while I paced the floor, thinking. If what she said was true, I'd lost more than 2 decades of my life without realizing it. And worse, I was changing into something not entirely human. In the morning, I found Sarah looking through my great-aunt's journal that I'd left on the kitchen table. "Mom, what is all this?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "This talks about transformations and guardians and something called the Keeper. Is this why you've been living out here alone? Some kind of cult thing?" "It's not a cult, Sarah." I sat beside her. "It's complicated. This land, it's special. It needs protection." "From what?" I hesitated. "Not from, for." I spent the next hour explaining everything I'd learned, the pact my ancestors made, the guardians, the 7-year cycles, my great-aunt's transformation. Sarah listened, her expression changing from skepticism to horror. "You need to leave this place, Mom," she said when I finished. "Today, come home with me." "I can't just leave." "Why not?" "Because some journal says so? Because you've been having weird dreams? Listen to yourself." To prove my point, I took her outside. I showed her the stone circle, the tree with its strange symbols, the perfect ring of bones at the property line. I called to the forest animals, and they came to me. Squirrels, rabbits, even a fox, gathering at my feet like pets. "This isn't normal, Mom," Sarah whispered. "I know," I said quietly, "but it's my responsibility now." That afternoon, I noticed Sarah exhibiting the same signs I had when I first arrived, her head turning toward sounds I knew she shouldn't be able to hear, her eyes tracking movements in the forest that human eyes shouldn't be able to see. The land was recognizing her. The guardians were evaluating her as a potential keeper. That night, Sarah had her first dream. I heard her crying out in her sleep. And when I went to check on her, she was thrashing under the blankets, her hands curved into claws, scratching at the air. In the morning, she wouldn't look at me. "I dreamed I was running through the forest on all fours," she said flatly. "Hunting. I caught a rabbit with my teeth." My heart sank. The process was already beginning. The land was trying to claim her as it had claimed me. Over the next few days, I noticed more changes in myself. My eyesight sharpened until I could count the needles on a pine tree from 100 yards away. My hearing became so sensitive that I could hear Sarah's heartbeat from across the room. I could smell the emotions of the animals in the forest. Their fear, their hunger, their curiosity. My body changed too. My skin grew tougher, almost like hide in some places. My teeth continued to sharpen. I found myself preferring to crouch rather than sit, to run on all fours when I was alone in the forest. Sarah watched these changes with growing fear. "You need to fight this, Mom," she begged. "Whatever's happening to you, you need to stop it." I tried to explain that there was no stopping it. This was my destiny, my purpose. But how could she understand? One morning, Sarah announced she was going into town for supplies. I knew what she was really doing, looking for help, maybe planning not to return. The thought made something wild and angry rise up in me. As she headed for her car, I felt a pain like fire racing through my body. I fell to my knees, gasping. My bones seemed to shift beneath my skin, my fingers stretched, the joints popping. Sarah ran to my side. "Mom, what's wrong?" "You can't leave," I managed to say through clenched teeth. "The land won't let you." She helped me back inside, her face pale with fear. "What do you mean it won't let me?" "The boundary," I whispered. "It knows you're trying to leave. It's punishing me as the keeper." "That's insane. It's just land." But that night, when Sarah tried to sneak away while I was sleeping, she found her car wouldn't start. The next day, a fallen tree mysteriously blocked the only road out. When she tried to walk out, a sudden fog descended, so thick she couldn't see her hand in front of her face. She wandered for hours, only to find herself back at the cabin. The land wanted her to stay. As April turned to May, Sarah began to accept our situation. She helped me tend the gardens, feed the new animals I'd acquired. Sometimes I caught her staring into the forest with a look of longing that mirrored my own. One night, during a full moon, the Alpha Guardian appeared at our door. Sarah screamed when she saw it, but I felt only a strange sense of kinship. It beckoned to me with one clawed hand. "I have to go with it," I told Sarah. "No." She grabbed my arm. "It's not human, Mom." "Neither am I. Not anymore." I followed the Guardian into the forest, to the great oak tree at the center of my property. The other Guardians were already there, arranged in a circle around the tree. In the moonlight, I could see them clearly for the first time. Their powerful bodies covered in dark fur, their faces a disturbing blend of wolf and human features, their eyes glowing with ancient intelligence. The Alpha Guardian pressed its hand against the largest symbol on the tree. The bark split open, revealing a hollow space inside. From this space, it removed what looked like a small bowl made of wood and bone. It offered the bowl to me. Inside was a dark liquid that smelled of earth and blood. I knew what this meant. The final transformation was at hand. If I drank, I would complete my first 7-year cycle and become like my great-aunt. Less human, more guardian, bound to this land forever. But what would happen to Sarah? As if reading my thoughts, the Alpha Guardian pointed to her, then to the bowl, then back to me. A choice. I could complete the transformation, or I could pass my role to my daughter, my blood relative, the next in line. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing, watching with wide, frightened eyes. I could see the changes already beginning in her, the slightly elongated fingers, the unusual alertness in her gaze. In a few years, she would look as I did now. No, I couldn't do that to her. I wouldn't trap her as I had been trapped. I took the bowl in my hands and raised it to my lips. "Mom, don't!" Sarah cried, running toward me, but it was too late. I drank the liquid in one swallow. It burned like fire going down, spreading through my body in waves of heat and pain. I fell to my knees, my body convulsing. I could feel myself changing more rapidly now, bones shifting, muscles stretching, senses sharpening beyond anything human. Through the haze of pain, I saw the Guardians forming a tighter circle around me, their howls rising to the moon. Sarah tried to reach me, but two of the Guardians blocked her path. I managed to lock eyes with her one last time. "Run," I gasped through teeth that no longer fit properly in my mouth. "When it's done, run." Then the pain took me completely, and I knew nothing more. I woke up 3 days later, lying in my bed. Sarah sat beside me, her face tired and afraid. "Mom," she whispered, "are you still you?" I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a rough growl. My tongue felt wrong in my mouth. I lifted my hands to see curved claws where my fingernails had been, dark hair growing thick along my forearms. I nodded slowly. Yes, I was still me. Mostly. Sarah helped me stand. My body felt different, stronger, more agile, but also strange and unfamiliar. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were larger, amber-colored now instead of brown. My teeth had grown into pointed fangs. My ears had shifted position, now sitting higher on my head. "What happened after I drank from the bowl?" I asked, my voice raspy but understandable. "The dog creatures, the Guardians, they carried you back here. They've been outside the cabin ever since, waiting." Sarah shuddered. "I tried to leave twice. I can't. It's like the forest itself turns me around and leads me back. I knew what I had to do." "There's one more ritual," I said. "Something I need to finish so you can go free." In my great-aunt's journal, she had written about the final consumption, a ritual where the new keeper had to consume a small piece of the previous keeper's remains, connecting to the unbroken line of Guardians. It was the only way to complete the transformation and fully bond with the land. I led Sarah to the root cellar I'd discovered. In the back, behind all the memory boxes, was a small stone container. Inside was what looked like a piece of dried meat. "I don't want to know what that is, do I?" Sarah asked. I shook my head. "Wait outside." Alone in the cellar, I ate the preserved flesh of my great-aunt Mabel. It tasted of earth and time and wild things. As I swallowed, I felt a rush of energy surge through me. Memories, knowledge, power flowing into my body like electricity. When I emerged, the Guardians were waiting, forming a half circle around the cellar entrance. Sarah stood frozen, watching them. The Alpha approached me, lowering its massive head in what seemed like respect. I found I could understand its thoughts now. Not words exactly, but intentions, emotions, images shared directly with my mind. It showed me the property boundaries, the places where the barrier between this world and something else was thin. It showed me how to strengthen those boundaries, how to keep whatever was on the other side from breaking through. That was the true purpose of the Keeper. Not just to watch over the land, but to maintain the barrier, to prevent something ancient and hungry from entering our world. The Guardians weren't the threat. They were the wardens, and I was to be their new leader. I turned to Sarah, knowing what I had to do. "I need to make sure you forget this place," I said, "that you never come back." "I won't leave you here," she insisted. "You have to." I took her hands in my clawed ones. "This is my purpose now, but it isn't yours." I led her to the oak tree, the Guardians following silently. From my pocket, I took a small knife. I pricked my finger, letting 3 drops of my changed blood fall onto the largest symbol carved into the bark. The tree glowed with blue light. I placed my hands on Sarah's temples and spoke words I somehow knew, though I'd never heard them before. Ancient words of forgetting, of aversion, of protection. Sarah's eyes glazed over. I felt the spell take hold, a powerful magic that would make her forget this place existed, that would create an unbreakable aversion to these woods. She would leave and never return. She would be safe. Go to your car, I told her. Drive. Away and don't look back. Like a sleepwalker, Sarah turned and walked to her SUV. This time, it started easily. I watched her drive down the road, disappearing around the bend. The spell would hold until she was far away. Then she would wake, with only vague memories of looking for me and finding nothing. My heart broke as I watched her go, but I felt a strange peace too. I had saved her from my fate. That night, the Guardians gathered around me in the clearing with the stone circle. They moved in complex patterns, teaching me the rituals I would need to know, showing me how to patrol the boundaries of our territory. I found I could shift forms now, not completely, but enough to run with them on all fours when needed, to hunt as they hunted, to communicate as they communicated. With each passing day, I felt less human and more something else. Not quite guardian, but no longer woman either. The weeks turned to months. I maintained my garden and kept my chickens, clinging to these human activities even as other memories began to fade. Sometimes I couldn't remember my husband's face or the sound of Sarah's laugh when she was small, but I remembered my purpose. The protection of the boundary, the containment of what lay beyond. I established new patterns with the Guardian Pack. They accepted me as their leader, though the Alpha remained my second in command, my teacher in this new existence. Together, we walked the property lines each night, reinforcing the barrier with rituals of blood and bone. My human appearance continued to change. My spine curved, better suited to running on all fours. My face elongated slightly, my senses sharpened beyond anything humanly possible. I could hear a mouse's heartbeat under 3 feet of snow. I could see in perfect darkness. I could smell emotions, intentions, the coming weather, the passage of time itself. One by one, my human memories faded, replaced by a deeper knowledge of the land and its secrets. I forgot my last name, the city where I'd grown up, the college I'd attended. But I remembered Sarah, always Sarah. I kept a hidden record of my experience, journals like those my great-aunt had kept, photos of my changing form, letters to Sarah she would never read. I placed them in a box with my name, adding it to the Keeper's Gallery in the root cellar. Someday, another Thorn woman might find them and understand her heritage before it was too late. 5 years passed this way. I marked the seasons by the movement of stars, the migration of birds, the cycles of the moon that now controlled my body as surely as the tides. On a crisp autumn day, I detected an unfamiliar scent at the edge of my territory. Human, male, curious, rather than threatening. I watched from the shadows as a man in his 30s hiked along my boundary, taking photographs and making notes in a small book. I recognized the type, a researcher, a collector of stories, a seeker of the unknown. I could have remained hidden, but something in me wanted to be seen, to be documented, to prove that part of Eleanor Thorne still existed in this changed form. I stepped into a clearing just long enough for him to spot me. I heard his gasp, saw the shake in his hands as he raised his camera. One photo, that's all I allowed before melting back into the forest. "My God," I heard him whisper, "it's real. The West Virginia dogman is real. Let him take his photo back to the world. Let him add my image to his files of cryptids and monsters." None of it mattered as long as the boundary held. 20 years passed. The land and I became one entity. My consciousness spread throughout the 80 acres like roots of an ancient tree. I had completed nearly 3 7-year cycles. My human form was now just one of many I could wear, though I still preferred it when alone in my cabin. I kept track of the outside world through occasional newspapers left by hikers, through conversations overheard from trespassers. I learned of wars and presidents, of new technologies and changing climates. None of it touched me here in my timeless territory. Then, one spring morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, a familiar presence at the boundary of my land, a blood connection, family. On the road leading to my property stood a woman in her 40s, her dark hair streaked with grey. She stared into the forest with a mixture of confusion and longing on her face. Sarah's daughter, my granddaughter. She had my eyes, my original human eyes, not the amber ones I wore now. She hesitated at the property line, fighting against the aversion spell I had placed so long ago. Yet still she came, drawn by the same call that had brought me here, that had brought every Thorn woman here eventually. The cycle was beginning again. I could stop it. I could show myself, frighten her away, break the pattern that had claimed so many women in my family. But as I watched her take her first tentative steps onto my land, I felt the guardians gathering in the shadows around us. I felt the ancient hunger stirring beyond the boundary, testing its strength against my own. I felt the land itself reaching out to welcome its new potential keeper. Some cycles cannot be broken. Some territories must always have their guardians. Some bloodlines are bound to the land in ways even time cannot sever. I stepped back into the shadows, allowing my granddaughter to find her own way to the cabin, to discover the journals, to begin the journey I had taken. She would have 7 years to learn what I had learned. 7 years before the choice I had faced would become hers, and I would watch over her, as my great-aunt had watched over me, until the time came for me to join the land completely and surrender my form to the next keeper. The moon rose over my territory, full and bright. I lifted my head and howled, a welcome to my granddaughter and a farewell to the last pieces of humanity I still possessed. The cycle continues. The boundary holds. The land remembers. And somewhere in the forest, Eleanor Thorn runs with the guardians. Under the moonlight, her form shifting between woman and something else, keeper of secrets older than time itself. My name is Thomas Hargrove. I'm 38 years old, and I guess you could say I'm at rock bottom. My photography career is hanging by a thread, and my marriage fell apart 6 months ago when Lisa finally had enough of my obsessions. But I'm about to change all that. I've always believed Bigfoot is real, not like those crazy people you see on TV shows. I'm talking about a genuine undiscovered species. And I'm going to be the one to prove it once and for all. That's why I'm here in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. I found this old hunting cabin deep in the Cascade Mountains. It's nothing fancy, just a wooden shack with a small kitchen, a bed, and a bathroom that barely works. But it's perfect for my mission. First thing I did was turn this place into a high-tech research station. Took all the money I had left and spent it on the best equipment. I've got motion-activated cameras that can spot anything moving within 3 miles. Special microphones that can pick up sounds most people can't hear. Infrared sensors that work in complete darkness. I even set up a satellite internet connection so I can send my discoveries to the outside world right away. The locals think I'm crazy. That's fine. They'll change their tune when I'm on the cover of National Geographic. It's been 3 weeks since I set everything up, and I've already found some weird stuff. Yesterday, I spotted something that made my heart race. These strange wooden structures deep in the forest, not like anything animals would make. Some were tall lattices, about 15 feet high, with branches woven together in perfect patterns. Others were heavy logs stacked in ways that would take serious strength. No human hikers come out this far. No way. I've been mapping everything I find. There are game trails that form perfect circles around certain clearings. Trees bent at impossible angles, like something huge pushed them over, but didn't break them. I found caves with entrances blocked by boulders, arranged too neatly to be natural. Then came the first photos. Nothing clear yet, just blurry images of something massive moving between trees. Always partially hidden, like it knows exactly where. My cameras are pointing. I've hidden those cameras carefully, camouflaged them completely. But whatever this thing is, it's aware of them. That's when things got stranger. This morning, an old Native American man showed up at my cabin, just appeared out of nowhere while I was checking my equipment. "You're taking what isn't meant to. Be taken," he said quietly. I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Who are you? How did you get here?" "Joseph Running Elk," he said, not answering my second question. "From the reservation. The forest keeper doesn't like your eyes watching." "Forest keeper? You mean Bigfoot?" I asked, excited that a local was finally talking to me about it. He shook his head slowly. "That's your name for it, not ours. You should stop with the cameras. Some things aren't meant to be seen." I tried to get more information, but he just walked away into the trees. By the time I grabbed my jacket to follow him, he was gone. Later that day, I discovered something unsettling. 3 of my cameras had been turned to face trees instead of the clearing they were supposed to monitor. My microphones were partially broken, not smashed, but carefully disabled. And the memory cards in my storage devices had been taken out and put back in different slots. The next day, I went hiking along my usual trail and found a massive tree trunk completely blocking the path. This wasn't a tree that had fallen naturally. It had been pulled up by the roots and placed there deliberately. I had to hike a long way around and somehow ended up in a part of the forest I didn't recognize, even though I'd mapped this whole area. Then came last night. A huge thunderstorm hit around midnight. Lightning lit up the sky and rain pounded on the roof. I was checking my equipment when I saw them through the window. Tall, dark shapes standing around my cabin in the pouring rain. I counted 7, of them completely still, just watching. They stayed there for hours, not moving an inch despite the storm. Then, right before dawn, they disappeared. One by one, exactly 5 minutes apart. This morning, I noticed something else. My equipment picked up strange vibrations in the air, something called infrasound. It's so low, humans can barely hear it, but it makes you feel sick and scared without knowing why. And this infrasound was coming from all directions around my cabin, like something was surrounding me. I'm not leaving, though. Whatever's out there, I'm going to find it. I'm going to photograph it, and I'm going to show the world that Thomas Hargrove isn't a failure after all. But as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not the one doing the investigating anymore. I'm being studied, tested, and I'm starting to think these woods might be more dangerous than I ever imagined. I've been in these woods for almost a month now, and something is very wrong. This morning, I checked the memory card from the camera facing my bed. I always keep it running while I sleep, just in case. What I saw made my blood run cold. There I was, sleeping in my bed at 2:17 p.m. yesterday. But that's impossible. At 2:17 p.m., I was hiking 3 miles away, taking soil samples near one of those strange wooden structures. I have photos on my phone to prove it. I checked the camera for signs of tampering. Nothing. The timestamp was correct. The camera diagnostics showed no errors. But there I was, somehow in 2 places at once. The forest itself feels different now. Yesterday, I followed a stream that I've used as a landmark since I got here. It's always flowed east to west. Except now it doesn't. Now it curves north before bending west. I thought I was losing my mind, so I checked my maps. The maps show the old direction, but the actual stream has changed. It's not just the stream. A group of 3 pine trees I've been using to mark the way back to my cabin has moved about 50 yards from where it should be, and the big rock shaped like a turtle's shell that I pass every day. It's now on the opposite side of the trail. I tried telling myself I was confused or tired. Then I got back to my cabin and found something I can't explain away. Footprints inside my cabin. Huge footprints in the dust on the floor, leading from the front door to my research table and back. 22 inches long at least, with weird ridge patterns like fingerprints but more complex. The door was locked when I got back. All the windows were shut. Nothing was broken, but something had been inside. My food supplies are being messed. With two, I keep everything organized in plastic containers, all labeled. This morning, I found all my protein bars stacked in a perfect tower in the middle of the kitchen table. My flashlight had been taken apart and put back together, but now it's brighter and the battery seems to last longer. How is that even possible? The birds and animals are acting strange too. I've started to notice patterns in their behavior. When the birds suddenly go quiet in one area of the forest, they'll start going quiet in the next area about 2 minutes later, and then the next. It's like they're tracking something moving through the trees, something they're afraid of. Each morning now, I find weird arrangements of things outside my door. Pine cones and stones laid out in spirals, broken pieces of my equipment mixed with leaves and twigs to form what almost looks like writing. Something is trying to communicate with me. 2 days ago, I was sitting at my desk when I felt something nearby. Really nearby. Maybe 100 yards from the cabin. And then, the weirdest thing happened. My coffee mug, pen and compass all lifted off the table and started spinning slowly in the air, just floating and turning in circles. It lasted about 10 seconds before everything dropped back down. The compass doesn't work right anymore. I'm finding my personal stuff in strange places too. The wedding ring I still carry, I know, pathetic. I found it sitting perfectly centered on top of one of my disabled cameras 5 miles from my cabin. An old photo of me as a kid that I keep in my wallet was tucked into a hollow tree where one of my audio recorders had been. I called in some colleagues from the university last week. 2 researchers who owed me favors. They showed up full of excitement about my discovery. Both left within 2 days. Janet got violently sick, throwing up, dizzy, couldn't stand up. Mike started having panic attacks, saying he felt like something was watching him, pressing against his mind. He said he had to leave now. They practically ran to their car. Then, last night it happened. I was checking the cameras near the largest wooden structure when my head suddenly felt like it was splitting open. I fell to my knees as images flooded my mind. Ancient trees, underground rivers, the boundaries of the forest territory, and warnings. So many warnings about crossing thresholds and taking what isn't offered. I saw maps of the forest that showed hidden places, caves I hadn't found yet. When I woke up, I was back in my cabin. In my bed. 18 hours had passed. I have no memory of walking back, no memory of anything after those images poured into my head. I should leave. Any sane person would pack up and go. But now I'm certain there's something out there. Something that's been hiding from humans for centuries. And I'm closer than anyone has ever been to discovering it. I just hope I'm not too close. I saw it today. Not just glimpses or shadows. I saw it fully, in broad daylight. I was checking one of my camera traps near the big clearing when I felt that now familiar stillness in the air. The birds went silent. The wind seemed to stop. Even the insects quieted down. I froze, my hand still on the camera. That's when it stepped out from between 2 massive pine trees about 50 yards away. It was huge, so much bigger than I expected, at least 9 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dark reddish-brown hair that looked almost black in the shadows. But the face, that's what got me. Not quite ape, not quite human. The eyes were deep-set under a heavy brow, intelligent and ancient, like they'd seen thousands of years pass by. It just stood there watching me. It didn't make any threatening moves, didn't growl or beat its chest like gorillas do in movies. It simply observed me, head tilted slightly, like I was some curious new animal it had discovered. I couldn't move. My camera was right there in my hand, but I couldn't lift it. Not because I was scared, though I was, but because something in my mind told me not to. Like a voice whispering, "Don't, not this way." Then it happened again. That flood of images in my head, but this time so much stronger. I saw forests burning, bulldozers knocking down trees, animals fleeing from hunters, oceans filled with plastic. I saw all the damage humans have done to the world, but from the perspective of something that had watched it happen over centuries. The images were so intense they hurt. My nose started bleeding and I fell to my knees. When the images finally stopped, the creature was gone. But something had changed. I could feel the forest in a way I never had before. Like all the trees, plants, and animals were connected in one giant web, and now I could sense small parts of it. I'm starting to understand what's happening here. This Bigfoot isn't just some undiscovered ape. It's more like a guardian, a physical form that the forest itself uses to interact with intruders. Like the forest is one giant living thing, and the creature is its hands and eyes and voice. Today, I found a cave that wasn't on any of my maps. Something drew me to it, that same whisper in my mind saying, "Here, look here." The entrance was hidden behind a cluster of ferns, and I had to crawl on my hands and knees to get in. Inside, I found something that made me sick to my stomach. Preserved remains, human remains. Some looked decades old, but others seemed more recent. Each body was changing. One had bark-like patches growing on the skin. Another had fungus sprouting from the arms in beautiful, intricate patterns. A third had roots, actual tree roots, woven through the ribcage. One body wore the tattered remains of a research jacket from a university expedition in the 1970s. Another had a camera around its neck with a brand that was popular in the 90s. They all came here looking for evidence, just like me. And the forest has kept them. I should have been terrified, should have run away right then. But instead, I felt a strange calm. Because I'm changing too. My hearing has gotten sharper. I can hear streams running from hundreds of yards away. My sense of smell is stronger. I can pick up the scent of deer that passed through hours ago. A cut on my arm from 2 days ago is completely healed, not even a scar left. And this morning, a squirrel came right up to me and sat on my boot, like it was completely unafraid. But the strangest thing is what happens when I'm near the big wooden structures. Time seems to slow down. The air feels thicker. Sometimes I see flashes of light where there shouldn't be any, glimpses of shapes that don't make sense, like looking through a window into somewhere else. Joseph Running Elk found me again yesterday. This time I was ready with questions. "What are those structures?" I asked him. "The wooden ones, doorways," he said simply. "The forest keeper guards the thin places." Thin places, what does that mean? Places where this world and others press close together? The keeper makes sure nothing crosses that shouldn't. I shook my head. "That's impossible. There aren't other worlds." Joseph just smiled sadly. "The people who lived here for thousands of years knew better. The cave drawings show the keepers and the doorways. They show the agreement." "What agreement?" I asked. "Some humans would help guard the doorways. They would become keepers. In return, the forest would protect the people." "I found the cave drawings," he mentioned, "deep in the back of that same cave, behind the bodies. Ancient red paint showing tall figures standing at what looked like doorways made of crossed lines, and beside them, smaller human figures with their arms raised. Last night, I had the most intense experience yet. I was sitting by my campfire, when suddenly my mind seemed to expand. I could feel everything around me, every tree, every animal, every drop of water in the stream half a mile away. I could see through the eyes of an owl, hunting above the forest. I could feel what a fox felt as it chased a rabbit through the underbrush. I could sense the slow, patient thoughts of the oldest trees, and through it all, I felt the presence of the creature, the keeper. Not just one, but several of them, moving through the forest, all connected to this vast mind that stretched across the entire territory. The forest showed me things, showed me that the creatures aren't just guarding against human intrusion, they're guarding against something else. something that presses against the thin places, trying to find a way in. I'm starting to understand the true purpose of the Bigfoot creatures. They're not just some missing link in evolution, they're guardians of reality itself, protecting our world at points where the boundaries between dimensions become weak, and now the forest is asking me to join them. I don't recognize my own reflection anymore. It started with small changes. My skin got tougher, especially on my hands and feet. The cuts and scrapes that come from hiking through rough forest just stopped bothering me. Then I noticed I could see clearly at night, almost like I had night vision. My sense of smell became so strong I could tell which animals had passed through an area hours before. I could hear things from miles away, conversations of hikers on distant trails, the sound of cars on the highway beyond the forest edge. But now the changes are more obvious. I'm getting bigger. My clothes don't fit right. My shoes are too tight. When I measured myself against the doorframe, I was 3 inches taller than when I arrived here 2 months ago. My hair is growing faster and thicker. My nails are harder, more like claws. The forest keeps putting knowledge into my head. Not just pictures anymore, but information. Things I couldn't possibly know. I can identify every plant, every animal, every insect by sight. I know which are poisonous, which are safe to eat, which have healing properties. I know the migration patterns of birds that haven't even arrived yet. I know where underground springs will surface in the next rainy season. I know things about human history too. I see glimpses of the first people who lived in these forests thousands of years ago. I see European explorers getting lost in these woods in the 1800s. I see a plane crash from the 1950s that was never found. The forest showed me how it's all connected, how the trees talk to each other through their roots, how they share food and warning signals, how the whole ecosystem works together like one giant organism, and how the keepers, the Bigfoot creatures, are like the forest's hands and eyes. Yesterday, I touched a tree and felt the water moving up from its roots to its leaves. I put my hand on the ground and sensed a mouse tunneling 20 feet away. I'm becoming part of it all. The main keeper, the one I saw that first time, visits me regularly now. It doesn't try to hide anymore. It comes right up to my cabin and waits for me to come out. We don't speak with words, but we communicate. It's showing me the territory, teaching me the boundaries that need protecting. It showed me the weak spots, the thin places Joseph talked about. They look like shimmering patches of air, like heat rising from hot pavement. When I get close to them, I hear whispers and see flashes of landscapes that aren't from our world. Strange colors, impossible shapes, things moving that shouldn't be able to move. The keeper took me deeper into the cave system yesterday, miles in, through tunnels so narrow I had to crawl. We came to a large chamber lit by some kind of glowing fungus. And there, sitting against the wall, was a man. At least, he used to be a man. Now he was something in between human and keeper. His body was huge, covered in patchy hair. His face was elongated, but you could still see human features. Beside him lay a weathered backpack with a tag. University Research Team, 1964. He opened. His eyes, when we approached, they were cloudy, unfocused. He was dying. "You're the next one," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. "I can feel it." "The next what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Guardian. Keeper. Whatever you want to call it." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I've been doing it for 60 years, can't anymore. The boundaries are weakening, need new strength, new blood." "What happened to you?" I asked. "I came to find Bigfoot, just like you." He laughed, a sad sound. "Instead, Bigfoot found me, showed me what was really happening. The forest needed a guardian with human intelligence but keeper strength. A hybrid. I agreed to the transformation." "Why?" I asked. He gestured weakly at the wall. I hadn't noticed before, but there was a crack in the rock, glowing faintly with shifting colors. "That's a thin spot. beyond it, things that shouldn't. And come here, if the boundaries fail completely, he shook his head. End of everything. As we left, the keeper showed me more. Showed me what would happen if the guardianship failed. Reality itself would unravel. The laws of physics would break down. Things from elsewhere would come through. Then it showed me what would happen if I said yes. How I would complete the transformation. How I would become less human, more keeper. How I would gain the full strength and abilities needed to maintain the boundaries. How I would live for decades, maybe centuries in these woods. How I would eventually need to find my own replacement. It also showed me the cost. I would have to give up my human life completely. My memories, my identity would be absorbed into the forest mind. Enough of me would remain to do the work, to interact with humans who entered the territory. But Thomas Hargrove would effectively die. I was still wrestling with this choice when I got the surprise visitor. Lisa, my ex-wife, standing at my cabin, her door looking worried and angry at the same time. Thomas, what the hell? I've been trying to reach you for months. She stopped, staring at me. My God, what's happened to you? I tried to hide the changes, but there was no way. I was 8 inches, taller than when she'd last seen me. My face had changed, my voice was deeper. You need to leave, I told her. It's not safe here. Not without you, she said. Whatever's going on, we can get you help. But there is no help for what's happening to me. And now I'm caught between 2 worlds. The human connection pulling me back, the forest pulling me forward. The problem is I'm already changed too much. I'm stuck in the middle, not fully human anymore, but not fully keeper either. And that instability is affecting the forest. The thin places are getting weaker. Reality is starting to slip. Last night, I saw a patch of forest where gravity stopped, working, leaves and twigs floating upward into the sky. This morning, I found a spot where time runs backward, water flowing uphill, birds flying in reverse. I have to choose, and I have to choose soon, before everything falls apart. The choice was never really mine to make. Deep down, I think I knew that from the first time I felt the forest reaching into my mind. Last night, as Lisa slept in the cabin, I stood outside under the stars with the keeper. We watched reality fracture around us, small at first, just tiny glitches in the world. A stream that flowed in 2 directions at once. A tree that existed and didn't exist in the same spot. A bird frozen in mid-flight, unmoving for hours. If I say no, I asked, though I didn't need to speak out loud anymore, the keeper showed me the fractures would spread beyond the forest, into towns, cities. The thin places would tear open completely. Things would come through, things that don't belong in our world. And if I say yes, the answer came as a series of images. My human self, fading like an old photograph. My body, completing its transformation. The forest boundaries, healing and strengthening. The thin places, sealing shut. Lisa, returning safely to her life. Carrying a false memory of finding my empty cabin, a goodbye note, signs that I had simply moved on. I looked back at the cabin where Lisa slept. There was still so much unresolved between us. So many things I never said, but I knew now that Thomas Hargrove had been chosen for this long before he ever set foot in these woods. The cameras, the research, the obsession with finding Bigfoot, it was all the forest's way of calling me here. My decision made itself. The transformation wasn't painful, not exactly. More like being unmade and remade. My body stretched and changed. My mind expanded until it touched every part of the forest. My memories, childhood, college, marriage, career, flowed out of me like water and into the collective consciousness of the trees, the soil, the animals. I could still access them, but they felt distant, like I was watching someone else's life. In return, I received the memories of all previous guardians, indigenous shamans who took on the role voluntarily to protect sacred lands, explorers who stumbled into the forest's embrace, Scientists like me, who came looking for one truth and found another. Each guardian adding their knowledge to the forest mind before passing on the role. By dawn, it was complete. I stood over 8 feet tall, my body powerful and covered in thick hair. My senses extended for miles in every direction. I could feel every living thing in my territory. I could sense the boundaries between worlds and knew exactly how to maintain them. I returned to the cabin just as Lisa was waking up. I stood in the shadows, watching her through the window as she called my name, growing increasingly worried. I reached out with my mind and gently reshaped her memories, created images of finding the cabin empty, a note explaining I had gone to pursue research in another location, evidence of a hasty but planned departure. I felt guilty for the deception, but it was kinder than the truth. I watched as her worry turned to anger, then sad acceptance. She gathered her things and left, finding the trail mysteriously clear all the way back to her car. As soon as she was gone, I began my work. The previous Guardian had let too many boundaries weaken. The territory needed to be expanded, protected. I moved through the forest, sealing weak spots, strengthening the barriers between worlds. I redirected streams to create natural boundaries. I manipulated wildlife patterns to keep humans away from the most vulnerable areas. I'm learning to create versions of myself that appear more human, projections I can use to interact with people who wander too deep into the woods. Just enough to convince them to turn back, to feel a sudden urge to be elsewhere. Most never realize they've been manipulated. They simply find themselves walking in circles, equipment failing mysteriously, overcome with unexplainable anxiety until they leave. The irony isn't lost on me. I came here to prove Bigfoot exists, and now I am Bigfoot. I am the thing that hides from cameras, that leaves strange footprints, that people glimpse through the trees. I am the watcher in the trees that generations of humans have told stories about. Around campfires. The human part of me, what's left of Thomas Hargrove, knows that someday I'll need to find my replacement. Like the dying guardian in the cave, I'll eventually grow old and weak. The forest will call someone new, someone with the right mix of curiosity and connection to the natural world. Someone like I was. I've already begun watching for candidates. Last week, a young researcher set up camp near the eastern boundary of my territory. She's mapping bat populations, but I can sense her awareness of the forest, her openness to the unexplained. I'll test her, just as I was tested. Leave signs for her to follow, see if she has the capacity to understand what she's seeing. Most won't be right. Most will run away when faced with the truth. But eventually, someone will stay. Someone will say yes, and the cycle will continue. For now, though, I am the guardian. I am the keeper of boundaries. I'm the watcher in the trees, and if you're ever hiking in the remote forests of Oregon and you feel eyes on you, if the birds go suddenly quiet and the air grows still, know that you're being watched. Know that you're being evaluated. And know that some discoveries come at a price. Sometimes finding what you're looking for means becoming what you seek. My name is Raymond Foster. I'm 37 years old and just got out of prison after 12 long years. Armed robbery, that's what got me locked up. Not proud of it, but that's in my past now. All I wanted was a fresh start somewhere nobody knew me. Somewhere I could work with my hands and not have people looking at me like I was garbage. That's how I ended up here, in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, with nothing but desert in every direction. I spent nearly all the money I had saved from prison jobs to buy this old, abandoned gold claim. The guy who sold it to me laughed when I signed the papers, said nobody had found anything valuable on this land for decades. I didn't care about gold, though. I just wanted the isolation, the peace and quiet. The claim came with a small, beat-up shack that looked like it would fall apart in a strong wind. But it was mine, all mine. No guards telling me when to eat or sleep, no other inmates to watch out for. Just me in the desert and a chance to rebuild my life through honest work. I arrived in early spring of 1967. The desert was actually blooming, a little, with tiny flowers I couldn't name scattered across the dusty ground. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely way, just what I needed. What I didn't expect was the water. According to the paperwork, the claim had a small natural spring, but what I found was much more than that. There was a pool, crystal clear and perfectly cool, that never seemed to change temperature no matter how hot the day got. Around it, plants grew thick and green in patterns that looked almost planned, like someone had deliberately planted them long ago. I remember standing at the edge of that pool my first day here, looking at my reflection in the water and feeling something strange wash over me, like I belonged here, like I'd finally found home. If only I'd known what was waiting for me beneath the surface of this place. If only I'd listened when the warnings came. But I didn't. And now, everything has changed. This is my story. The first few weeks on my claim were hard but good. I worked from sunrise to sunset, fixing up the old shack. The walls needed patching and the roof leaked, but working with my hands felt right after so many years locked up. By the end of each day, my muscles ached, but it was a good kind of pain. The spring and pool became my favorite spot. After a long day of work, I'd wash the dust and sweat off in the cool water. It always stayed the same temperature, not too cold and not too warm, even when the desert days got hot enough to fry an egg on a rock. One day, while tearing out some old rotting boards inside the shack, I found something strange. Under the crumbling plaster were carvings in the stone wall. Not just any carvings, they looked ancient, pictures of what looked like lizard people standing on two legs, mixing with humans in some kind of ceremony. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the grooves worn smooth by time. Who made these, and how long ago? They gave me a funny feeling, but I was more curious than scared. I started a garden near the pool since water was so easy to get there. What happened next was the first real sign that something wasn't normal about this place. Seeds I planted sprouted overnight. Vegetables grew in days instead of weeks. The tomatoes were the sweetest I'd ever tasted, and the herbs smelled stronger than any I'd seen before. I figured it must be the good desert soil and the spring water. Then came the full moon. I was sitting outside my shack smoking a cigarette when I noticed how the rocks around my claim were glowing. Not just reflecting moonlight, but actually giving off a blue-white glow of their own. All those glowing lines seemed to point right at my spring, and I swear I heard chanting, very faint, coming from somewhere out in the empty desert. I told myself it was just the wind. A week later, I had a visitor. An old man named Hank Miller rode up on a mule. He was thin and weathered like old leather, with eyes that had seen too much sun. He asked for water, which I gave him, but he wouldn't. Drink from my canteen. He brought his own. You're the new owner, he said. It wasn't a question. That's right. Name's Raymond Foster. He looked at me hard. Folks around these parts stay away from this land, been that way for generations. Why's that? I asked. The old ones beneath, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. They own this water, not you. He nodded toward my spring. That water changes what drinks it, changes it slow but sure. I laughed, but Hank didn't smile. He just mounted his mule and said, "Don't say no one warned you, Foster," before riding away. I brushed it off as superstition, until a young woman showed up a few days later. She introduced herself as Dr. Elaine Morris, a geologist studying the area. She had short brown hair and wore heavy boots and khaki clothes covered in dust. She asked if she could take some readings on my property. While using her equipment, she kept frowning and checking if it was working right. "Something wrong?" I asked. "These readings don't make sense," she said. "The water table here is completely different from everywhere else for 50 miles. And these mineral deposits," she pointed to some reddish rocks, "they shouldn't be here. This whole area is like a geological puzzle." She looked at me with concern. "And my compass keeps spinning. When I get near your spring, That night I cut my hand while chopping wood. It was a deep gash across my palm, the kind that would need stitches if I was near a town. But I wasn't. So I went to the spring and dipped my bleeding hand in the cool water. The pain stopped instantly. When I pulled my hand out, the bleeding had stopped too. By morning, what should have been a serious wound was just a thin pink line. That's when I first noticed something in the water. Tiny, sparkling specks that seemed to disappear when I tried to look directly at them. You could only see them from certain angles, like they were hiding from you. I started to feel watched, not by people, but by animals. Lizards would line up on rocks around my garden, all facing my cabin. Snakes would coil at the edge of my property, not threatening, just watching. Even the desert tortoises, which are rare to see, showed up in groups. One night I counted 14 of them arranged in a perfect circle around my shack. 2 days after her visit, I found Hank Miller dead. I was checking some spots beyond my claim when I saw his mule wandering alone. I followed its tracks back and found Hank's body by his campfire. He looked like he had been dead for weeks, all dried out like a mummy, but I'd just seen him alive less than 48 hours ago. I rode his mule to the nearest town and told the sheriff. They came and took Hank's body away. Later, the sheriff told me that according to the doctor, Hank had no fluids left in his body at all, like he'd been drained completely dry, and he had tiny puncture marks all over his skin that they couldn't explain. That night, I sat on my porch with a rifle across my lap, watching the desert and wondering what I had gotten myself into. The moon wasn't full anymore, but the rocks still seemed to glow faintly, and this time I was sure I heard chanting. I started losing time about a month after moving to the claim. The first time it happened, I got up at sunrise to work on building a storage shed. I remember picking up my hammer, driving in the first nail, and then nothing. Suddenly I was standing waist deep in the spring pool. The moon was high overhead. Somehow, the entire day had vanished. My skin felt strange, slick and shiny, like it was covered in some kind of clear slime. I scrambled out of the water, heart pounding. What had I been doing for the past 15 hours? Why couldn't I remember? I checked myself for injuries, but found nothing. Just that odd, slippery coating that dried quickly in the night air. After that first time, it happened again every few days. I'd lose hours, sometimes a whole day, and often find myself at the spring when I woke up. I started tying a rope from my wrist to my bed at night. Twice I woke up with the rope mysteriously untied. The water itself began acting strange. Once I watched a small stream from the spring flow uphill against gravity, snaking up a rock face like it had a mind of its own. Another time, I dipped my hand in the pool, and the water became thick like jelly, letting me scoop it up and mold it like clay before it melted back into normal water. My body was changing too. My skin got drier and drier, cracking painfully unless I soaked in the spring several times a day. I found myself more sensitive to the heat and cold, needing to stay in the shade during hot afternoons when before I could work right through the midday sun. Strange, clear patches appeared at my elbows and knees, almost like I could see through my own skin in those spots. Food didn't interest me much anymore. I'd cook beans or open a can of beef stew, but after a few bites, I'd feel full. Sometimes days would pass before I realized I hadn't eaten anything solid. The strangest part was how I began to know things about my property that I shouldn't know. If a coyote crossed onto my claim a mile away, I somehow felt it. I could sense when rain was coming hours before the clouds appeared. Once, as a test, I put on a blindfold and walked the entire perimeter of my claim without stumbling once, like my feet knew exactly where to go. I should have left then, packed up my few belongings and walked away, but something kept me there, something that felt like belonging, like purpose. And the water, I couldn't imagine leaving that spring behind. After one night of bathing in the spring under the full moon, I noticed something on my back while drying off. Using a small mirror, I saw tiny scale-like patches forming along my spine. They were smooth and slightly raised, with a faint greenish tint. I found more of them on my neck and the backs of my hands. In normal daylight, they were barely noticeable, but under the moonlight they seemed to shimmer. The wildlife around my claim started acting bizarre. Scorpions would move in formations like tiny armies. Snakes slithered in regular patterns along the edges of my property, like they were guarding. Yet birds circled overhead whenever someone approached by car or horse, as if giving a warning. My dreams changed too. I dreamed of ceremonies performed around the spring, hundreds of reptile-like creatures dancing under moonlight. I saw battles between these creatures and humans with stone spears. I watched through someone else's eyes as they taught certain chosen humans how to hide underground chambers when the first white settlers arrived with guns and crosses. These didn't feel like normal dreams. They felt like memories, just not my memories. I tried leaving once, packed a bag, and started walking toward town. Made it about 5 miles before the pain started, a terrible burning in my veins like my blood had turned to acid. The further I got from the spring, the worse it hurt. By mile 7, I collapsed on the dirt road, my vision going dark. I crawled back toward my claim, and with each yard closer, the pain eased. By the time I reached the spring and plunged into its waters, I felt normal again. The water had me now. I couldn't leave. While digging to expand my root cellar for storing vegetables, my shovel hit something metal. I dug carefully around it and pulled out an old lockbox, rusted but still intact. Inside were journals, 5 of them dating back to 1868. Each was written by a different person, all previous owners of my claim. The first journal belonged to a man named Thomas Ward. His early entries described finding the spring, the incredible, crops he grew, and the strangely healthy livestock. Then came entries about losing time, skin problems, and an increasing need to stay near the water. His final entry simply read, "They are calling me below, I go willingly." The other journals told similar stories, different men, different decades, but the same progression, the same transformation, the same end. One night, looking at my reflection, in a small shaving mirror, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. When I moved my hand to touch my face, my reflection moved a split second before I did, like it was leading rather than following. When I held perfectly still, my reflection's eyes shifted to look directly at me, and for just a moment, those eyes weren't human at all. I threw the mirror against the wall, shattering it. But when I looked down at the broken pieces on the floor, each fragment showed a different part of me, and none of them looked human anymore. It rained for 3 days straight during the 2nd month of summer, unusual for the desert. The water came down hard, washing away years of packed dirt and sand. On the morning after the rain stopped, I found something that had been hidden all this time. A dark opening in the ground beneath a large rock outcropping about 50 yards. From my shack, the hole was perfectly round, like someone had cut it with a giant cookie cutter. Smooth stone steps led down into darkness. I should have been afraid, but instead I felt a pull, like the hole was calling me home. I grabbed a lantern and went down. The steps seemed to go on forever, spiraling deeper into the earth. The air got cooler but didn't get stale like you'd expect underground. It felt fresh, with a slight dampness to it. My lantern light bounced. Off the walls, which were polished smooth like glass, the tunnel opened into a room that made me stop and stare. It was a perfect circle, maybe 30 feet across, with a domed ceiling that glowed with a soft blue light. There were no seams in the walls or floor, like the whole room had been carved from a single piece of stone. Doorways led off in different directions, but they weren't made for someone my size. They were taller and narrower, like they were built for someone with a different shape. I was examining the strange symbols carved around one doorway when I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like scales sliding across stone. I turned slowly. It stood 7 feet tall, watching me from across the room. Its body was vaguely human-shaped, but covered in greenish-grey scales that caught the blue light. It had a head similar to a lizard's, but larger, with intelligent yellow eyes that blinked sideways. Where a person would have arms, it had limbs ending in long fingers with claws. On its back were what looked like small, folded wings, not big enough to fly with, but definitely wings. I didn't run. I couldn't. My body wouldn't obey me. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it spoke, not with sounds, but somehow directly into my mind. Blood returns to water. Circle closes. Images flooded my head. This same underground room thousands of years ago, filled with creatures like the one before me. The spring as it was before humans ever found it. Ancient people being brought below. Some afraid, others willing. And blood, my blood, connected through generations back to those first humans who drank from the spring. The creature moved closer, its movements fluid and graceful. It raised one clawed hand and pointed at me. You belong, always belonged, return. It showed me then what it could do with water. With a gesture, water flowed from cracks in the wall, forming shapes in midair, spheres, spirals, and more complex forms I can't describe. The water moved against all natural laws, floating and spinning before rushing back into the wall cracks. Control. Life water. Control all. I understood somehow that life water meant any water inside living things. Blood, sweat, tears. These beings could control it all. The creature led me deeper into the underground complex. We passed through rooms filled with strange objects that looked part machine, part crystal. In one chamber, crystal columns reached from floor to ceiling, humming with energy. Inside some, I could see moving images like memories or dreams playing. Out the central chamber was the largest, with the spring pool at its center. But from below, I could see that the pool wasn't just a pool. It was a portal of some kind. The water curved impossibly downward, forming a tunnel that glowed with shifting colors. When I looked into it, I saw glimpses of another world, a vast landscape of strange rock formations, under a sky with 2 moons. Home, original home, opens when stars align. More memories poured into my mind, but not my memories. The memories of my guide and its kind. They showed me how they had lived in this region for thousands of years, how they had bred selectively with early humans to create bloodlines that could host their consciousness. My bloodline. They showed me how they had guided certain humans to this place over generations, how they had orchestrated events to bring compatible hosts to the spring when needed. My arrest, my prison time, none of it was accidental. It was all to bring me here, at this time, when they needed me. In another room I found evidence of previous owners, personal belongings from different eras, a pocket watch from the 1800s, a pistol from the early 1900s, even clothes that looked only decades old. Against one wall were 5 stone slabs with bodies in different stages of change. Some looked mostly human, with just patches of scales. Others were almost fully transformed into creatures like my guide. Their faces were peaceful, like they had accepted what was happening to them. The creature took me to a pool of water that was clearer than any I had seen before. As I looked into it, my mind connected with dozens, maybe hundreds of others, all thinking as one. I felt the weight of thousands of years of memories, of knowledge preserved and passed down. I understood then that these weren't just individuals, but parts of a greater whole, a shared mind spread across many bodies. Maintain balance, protect water, control earth movement. They showed me their true purpose, the reason they had lived hidden for so long. Deep underground, their ancient technology kept the desert's fragile water systems working. Without their constant maintenance, the entire region would become uninhabitable. They prevented earthquakes by relieving pressure along fault lines. They preserved plant and animal species that would otherwise die out. They were gardeners of a sort, tending to the land and its water in ways humans never could. Before leading me back to the surface, my guide took me to one final chamber. Here, in a pool of glowing blue water, it showed me the clearest vision yet. My ancestors, going back generations, all carefully guided to produce me. The perfect vessel for the consciousness of the eldest among them, a being that had lived for over 8 centuries, moving from body to body. When each grew too old, I was to be next, already beginning, already changing, soon ready. As I climbed back up to my shack in the fading daylight, I felt torn between horror at what I had seen and a strange sense of purpose. Part of me wanted to run, to fight against what was happening to me, but another part, a growing part, welcomed it. I looked at my hands in the sunset light and saw the scales had spread, covering most of my fingers now. I wasn't just Raymond Foster anymore. I was becoming something else, something ancient, something that belonged to the water and the desert, and the water belonged to me. The changes came faster after I met them. I'd wake up to find new patches of scales each morning. My bones ached constantly, like they were being reshaped from the inside. Sometimes I'd feel sharp pains in my chest, only to discover later that my ribs were becoming lighter, more hollow, like a bird's. I couldn't eat normal food anymore. The smell of cooking meat made me sick. Instead, I found myself drawn to the small animals around my property, lizards, frogs, and mice that I would catch with my bare hands. I won't describe what happened next. It shames the part of me that's still human. My breathing changed too. I could hold my breath underwater for 10 minutes, then 20, then nearly an hour. My lungs had developed some new way to get oxygen that I didn't understand. The strangest change was in my mind. I could feel water everywhere, in the ground, in plants, in the air, and in living things. I knew exactly how much water was in a cactus half a mile away. I could sense a rabbit hiding in its burrow just from the water in its body. One morning I found I could do more than sense water. I could move it. It started small. I held my hand over a cup of water and focused, and tiny droplets rose into the air. By the end of the week, I could pull moisture from the air itself, forming a floating ball of water between my palms. Time itself felt different. The days and nights blurred together. Sometimes I'd see what was going to happen minutes before it actually did, like watching the same movie scene twice. Other times I'd get lost in memories that weren't mine, ancient ceremonies, wars with early human tribes, the building of the underground chambers. The oldest one, the leader they called the Elder, visited me in dreams. It had lived for over 800 years by moving from body to body. Now it needed me, my body, my mind. We were compatible in ways I didn't fully understand, something about my bloodline making me the perfect next vessel. Part of me fought against it. The human part, Raymond Foster, ex-convict, who just wanted a quiet place to build a new life. That part of me would sometimes wake up screaming in the night, trying to claw the scales off my skin with my fingernails, which were now harder and more like claws themselves. During these episodes, my body would shake violently. My mind would split into 2 warring sides, human and reptile, fighting for control. After each episode, the human side was weaker. My last true moment of humanity came on a clear night under the stars. I remembered being 10 years old, swimming in a lake near my childhood home. I had gone too deep and started drowning. As the water filled my lungs, I remembered feeling peaceful, seeing strange lights in the deep water, hearing voices that weren't human. Now I understood. That hadn't been a near-death experience. It had been first contact, the reptile consciousness, reaching out through water, marking me as one of theirs even then. My whole life had been guided to bring me here. The next morning, men came, 5 of them in trucks with equipment. They wore matching khaki clothes with company logos, a mining survey team from some big corporation. They had maps and machines. They were looking for mineral deposits. I watched them from my shack window, feeling something cold and alien rise inside me. They were too close to the entrance I had found, too close to the sacred underground complex, too close to the water that was now part of me. The leader of the team approached my shack, a friendly man with a red beard and sunburned face. He knocked on my door and introduced himself, asked permission to survey my claim, offered money. I kept my scaled hands in my pockets and my face in shadow. I told him no. He insisted, mentioning government permits that gave them the right to check for certain strategic minerals regardless of private ownership. When he and 2 others started, setting up equipment near the hidden entrance, something snapped inside me. The reptile part took full control. I won't describe exactly what happened next. I still have nightmares about it. All I'll say is that I discovered what the Elder meant about controlling life water. 3 men fell without me touching them, their bodies crumpling as something vital was pulled from them. The other 2 ran for their truck, but a flash flood appeared out of nowhere in the dry desert, washing their vehicle into a ravine. There were no survivors. That night, the Elder came for me, not in dreams but in the flesh. It led me deep below to a chamber I hadn't seen before. The walls pulsed with blue light. In the center was a pool that glowed like liquid moonlight. The Elder was dying. Its current body had reached its limit after nearly a century of use. It needed me to continue its work, to maintain the ancient systems that kept the desert alive. To guard the water, I was stripped of my clothes, now useless with my changed body. My skin was more scale than flesh. My eyes adapted to see in darkness. My lungs and bones no longer fully human. I was lowered into the glowing pool. The water entered me through every pore, filling me completely. I felt the Elder's mind merge with mine, its memories, its knowledge, its purpose becoming part of me. I fought one last time, the remaining human part of Raymond Foster struggling to maintain some sense of self. But the water won. It always wins in the end. When I rose from the pool, I was both Raymond Foster and the Elder, a consciousness that had lived for 8 centuries in many bodies, now continuing in a new vessel. I retained enough of Raymond to remember his life, to speak his language, to pass as human when needed. But I was no longer human. I was a guardian of the water, a keeper of ancient knowledge, a protector of the desert's hidden heart, and I was very, very thirsty. The years passed differently after I changed. Time stretched and compressed like water, flowing between rocks. Sometimes a decade would feel like a single season. Other times, a single day watching the desert sunrise would feel like a year of experiences. I improved the land around my claim, working mostly at night now that my eyes preferred darkness. I created new water sources underground, linking them to the main spring through channels only I could sense. Plants grew where nothing had grown before. Animals thrived in the microclimate I built around my territory. During the day, I maintained a human appearance, or close enough to pass. I wore long-sleeve shirts and pants despite the heat, a wide-brimmed hat to shadow my face, and sunglasses to hide my changed eyes. The scales could be hidden, but my movements had become too fluid, too precise for a normal human. People noticed, but in the desert, folks tend to mind their own business. I legally established my mining claim as a business, filed the proper paperwork, paid taxes, even hired the occasional worker for surface operations. None of them stayed long. They always felt uneasy, like prey animals sensing a predator nearby. I never harmed them, but they knew something wasn't right. They just couldn't put their finger on what. Every few months, I'd drive into Las Vegas, or sometimes all the way to Reno, I had a purpose on these trips. I needed to find certain people, people with the right genetic makeup, descendants of the special bloodlines my kind had cultivated for centuries. I could smell them, sense the water in their bodies calling to mine. I wouldn't hurt them. I'd just talk to them, plant ideas in their minds. Suggestions about moving to Nevada, about exploring the desert, about seeking solitude or adventure. Sometimes I'd arrange job opportunities or property sales, subtle nudges that would slowly bring them closer to my territory. Seeds planted that might take decades to grow. I needed them, not now but in the future, bodies that could host consciousness like mine when this one grew too old. The cycle had to continue. The government became interested in my little corner of the desert in the early 1970s. Men in military uniforms set up a small monitoring station about 2 miles from my claim. They were studying the unusual water patterns in the region. I let them stay. They were far enough from the important underground sections, and I could learn from them. At night, I would sneak into their station while they slept. I'd read their reports, examine their equipment, absorb their knowledge of modern technology. Sometimes I'd slightly alter their readings or damage certain instruments, just enough to keep them from discovering anything significant. As the decades passed, tourism increased in the desert. Hikers, campers, off-road enthusiasts. Most, I simply guided away from my territory using my control of the water. A sudden dry stream bed here, an unexpected muddy patch there. But some came too close. I had to be selective. Those with compatible genetics I would spare, sometimes arranging accidents that would bring them into contact with the transformative waters. Just a taste, enough to plant the seed of change without their knowledge. The others, I made sure. They never returned to civilization to report what they found. In the 1980s, I activated parts of the ancient water system that had been dormant for centuries. The technology was beyond human understanding, part mechanical, part biological, designed to work with the thoughts of beings like me. With it, I extended my influence through the entire regional water table. By the time Las Vegas was booming in the 1990s, I had placed several partially transformed humans in key positions in the city's water management authority. They didn't know what they were. They just felt compelled to protect the water, to make certain decisions that benefited our kind. Meanwhile, the massive city grew more dependent on the very water sources we controlled. I established a network of legal protections for my territory. Some parts became conservation areas. Others were designated as cultural heritage sites due to ancient indigenous artifacts I strategically placed for archaeologists to discover. A few sections were declared military testing grounds, off limits to the public for security reasons. No human would ever own this land again. No development would ever threaten what lay beneath. As I approached the end of my 3rd decade in this body, I felt Raymond Foster fading away completely. The memories of the human I once was grew distant, like a story I had read, rather than a life I had lived. The Elder's consciousness became my primary identity, with its centuries of experience and knowledge. I began searching more actively for my next vessel. The transformation couldn't be rushed. It needed the right person with the right genetic makeup at the right time, and I found her in 1995. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, a young hydrogeologist with a passion for desert water systems. She had no idea that her great-grandmother had been one of our selected bloodlines, that her DNA carried the markers we had cultivated for generations. She thought she was applying for a routine research position at my now legitimate environmental consulting company. I stood in the shadow of my porch when she arrived, watching her step out of her dusty Jeep with eager eyes and a backpack full of scientific equipment. She was perfect, intelligent, isolated, with few family connections. No one would miss her for long when she eventually disappeared. As she walked toward me, hand extended in greeting, I felt the water in her body calling to mine. The ancient cycle was ready to continue. "Dr. Foster," she asked, smiling. "I'm Sarah Chen. Thank you for this opportunity." I stepped forward, taking her hand in my gloved one. "Welcome to the claim," I said. "I think you'll find our water systems fascinating." As I led her toward the cabin, I noticed a small lizard watching us from a nearby rock. Its eyes blinked sideways, reflecting the sun. The desert had many secrets, and Sarah Chen would soon become one of them, just as I had. Just as we all do. The water always wins in the end. My name is Frank Patterson. I'm 42 years old, and I guess you could say I've had an interesting life. I spent years as a forest ranger before the war called me away. World War II changed me, like it changed most of us who fought. When I came back home, I couldn't settle back into my old job. I needed something that was mine. That's why I put every penny of my savings into buying this land. 200 acres of Minnesota wilderness, thick with trees and teeming with wildlife. Perfect hunting grounds. The property came up at a bankruptcy auction after some logging company mysteriously shut down operations. The price was so low, I thought there must be some mistake, but I wasn't about to question my good fortune. I named it Black River Hunt Club. Had a nice ring to it, I thought. My dream was to turn it into the kind of exclusive hunting lodge that wealthy folks from the cities would pay top dollar to visit. The main building used to be the headquarters for the logging operation. It was run down but solid. As I started fixing it up, I noticed some weird things about how it was built. Some rooms just felt off. The walls didn't meet at proper right angles, and some doorways seemed tilted slightly. In the basement, I found walls that were way thicker than they needed to be. I figured the loggers weren't architects, so I just worked around these quirks. Weird thing happened when I tried to document the renovation work. I wanted photographs for brochures to show potential clients, but the pictures kept coming out wrong. Strange lights would show up in the developed film, like bright spots where nothing should be glowing. My tape recorder picked up odd noises, scratching sounds, and what sometimes sounded like whispering. Even my compass acted funny in certain parts of the property, the needle spinning or pointing in directions that made no sense. When I went into town to hire staff, the locals acted strange. Spruce Harbor is just a small place, not even 1,000 people. Everyone knows everyone, but when I mentioned where my property was, people got quiet. "I'll work days only, Mr. Patterson," one woman told me when I offered her a job cooking for the lodge. "Can't be out there after dark, not for any money." Others would make little signs with their hands before crossing onto my land, like they were warding off evil. No one would tell me why directly, just mumbled about old stories and best left. Alone. My dog Kaiser didn't help matters. He's a champion German shepherd, trained for hunting and about the most reliable animal I've ever known. But something about the northern section of the property spooked him bad. He'd refuse to go past certain points, hackles raised and teeth bared at empty air. Sometimes at night, he'd stand staring into corners of the lodge, growling at nothing. I could see. While marking out hunting zones around the property, I found something strange. Deep in the northern woods stood a perfect circle of wooden posts, enclosing about 40 acres of forest. Each post was carved with odd symbols. Some looked like those Norse runes you see in books, others like nothing I'd ever seen before. They looked old, weathered by many years of Minnesota winters. Curious, I drove to the county records office to learn more about the property. The clerk pulled out dusty ledgers, showing the logging company's history. Everything looked normal until 1937, when something odd happened. For 17 months, there was no communication from the company at all. No tax payments, no timber reports, nothing. Then in 1938, it started up again like nothing happened. But with all new people running things, the signatures in the books didn't match the ones from before. When I asked the clerk about it, she just shrugged. Lots of businesses had troubles. In those days, she said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. As opening weekend approached, I spent more time scouting the woods, mapping the best hunting spots. The wildlife behaved strangely. Deer seemed to watch me, sometimes even following me instead of running away. Once, climbing a ridge, I looked down to see a dozen squirrels arranged in a perfect straight line, evenly spaced, all facing the same direction. When I made a noise, they scattered as normal, but it gave me the creeps. 2 weeks before our first guests were due, I started hearing children. I was checking snare lines at dusk when the sound of kids laughing drifted through the trees. I called out, thinking maybe some local children had wandered onto the property, but got no answer. The voices seemed to move, always just out of sight. This happened night after night, always at sunset, always just beyond where I could see. I'd reach where I thought the sounds were coming from, only to hear them behind me instead. Despite all these strange happenings, I pressed ahead. The lodge was ready, fully stocked and beautifully furnished. Our first booking arrived, 5 businessmen from Chicago, all eager for an exclusive hunting trip away from civilization. Remember to stay on the marked trails, I told them as I showed them around. Especially avoid the north section past the wooden posts, easy to get turned around out there. They nodded and smiled, clearly not taking my warnings seriously. These city men, with their expensive gear and their confidence, they thought they knew better. Walter Harmon, the loudest of the group, actually laughed. "Don't worry about us. Patterson," he said, slapping my shoulder. "I've hunted all over the world. Your little forest doesn't scare me." As they settled into their rooms that first night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake bringing people here. Kaiser wouldn't stop pacing and whining, and outside, though the sky was clear, I could have sworn I heard the whisper of many feet moving through the fallen leaves. If only I'd listened to those warnings. If only I'd sold the property and walked away. But it was too late now. The darkness had fallen, and we were all deep in the woods, where something ancient and hungry was waking up. I woke up to screaming. It was the middle of the night, and one of the other guests was pounding on my door. When I opened it, I found Jim Blackwood standing there, his face white as a sheet. "Walter's gone," he said, his voice shaking. "Something's happened to Walter." We rushed to Walter Harmon's room. The door was still locked from the inside, but when we broke it open, Walter wasn't there. The sheets on his bed were stained with something dark that looked like blood. Next to the bed was a single muddy boot print. I called the local sheriff. Right away. While we waited, I gathered everyone in the main room of the lodge. The 4 remaining men sat close to the fire, speaking in low voices, jumping at every creak of the old building. When the sheriff arrived, he took samples of the blood and the boot print. Later, he called me with strange news. The lab said the boot print contained mud mixed with something biological, but it wasn't human or animal DNA. They couldn't identify it at all. I organized a search party the next morning. We split into teams to cover more ground, but something weird happened. Each team reported landmarks in different places than where they should be. My own watch said it was 2 p.m., but Jim's showed 3:30. When we tried using radios to coordinate, people described seeing things that weren't on any of our maps. "I'm standing by the waterfall," one of the guests said over the radio. "There isn't any waterfall on this property," I replied, confused. "I'm looking right at it," he insisted. While searching the north woods near those carved posts, I found something that made my blood run cold. Animal remains had been arranged in careful patterns. Small skeletons of rabbits and foxes were placed in shapes that reminded me of stars or snowflakes. In another clearing, I found deer organs laid out in perfect circles. Most disturbing were the animal skins stretched between trees like some kind of art display. Back at the lodge, things were getting stranger. Cold spots would appear in rooms, much colder than they should be. You could walk through the dining room and suddenly feel like you'd stepped into a freezer, then take another step and be warm again. These cold areas seemed to move around the lodge on their own. Time started acting funny too. Sunset came at 4:30 p.m. for me, but one of the guests swore it was still bright outside at 6. Clocks ran at different speeds in different rooms. One morning, I sat down for what felt like a quick cup of coffee, only to find that 3 hours had passed when I got up. On the third day after Walter disappeared, I was chopping firewood when I heard someone walking up behind me. I turned around and nearly fell over. It was Walter Harmon, looking perfectly fine, wearing clean clothes and smiling. "Morning, Frank," he said as if nothing had happened. "Walter, where have you been?" I asked, my axe still raised in my hand. I've been here the whole time," he said, looking confused. "Just went for a long hike yesterday. Why, did I miss something?" Something wasn't right. Walter spoke a little differently than before. His voice had the same sound, but the way he put sentences together was off. When the other guests ran out to see him, Walter couldn't remember stories they'd shared on the first night. And sometimes, when no one was directly talking to him, I'd catch him staring with an intensity that didn't seem human. That night, I checked the security cameras I'd installed around the lodge. What I saw on the tape made my skin crawl. When Walter thought no one was watching, he moved wrong. His joints bent backwards. He would stand completely still for minutes, then suddenly move so fast the camera barely caught it. Sometimes his face seemed to slip, like a mask that was too loose. The other guests started acting strange too. They accused each other of lying, of being in two places at once. "I just talked to you in the gun room," Bill told Jim at dinner. "How did you get here so fast?" "I haven't been in the gun room all day," Jim replied. They began watching each other, suspicious. Arguments broke out over conversations no one remembered having. The radio in my office started picking up impossible broadcasts. Late at night, I heard men talking about lumber quotas and cutting schedules, like the old logging operation was still running. Worse, I heard Walter's voice calling for help, even though he was supposedly asleep upstairs. Most terrifying were the times I heard my own voice describing events that hadn't happened yet. "The basement flooded after the pipe burst," my voice said over the static one night. But all the pipes were fine until the next morning when a water main broke and flooded the basement. The staff didn't stick around long after that. The final straw came when Lucy, our cook, went to get meat from the walk-in freezer and found Walter standing inside. He wasn't wearing a coat, wasn't shivering. According to Lucy, he'd been standing in the same spot for hours, not moving, not breathing, his skin as cold as the frozen meat around him. By sunset, every staff member had packed up and left. It was just me, Kaiser, and the 5 guests, including Walter, who wasn't really Walter anymore. I knew then that something terrible was happening at Black River Hunt Club, something I couldn't explain or understand. But it was only the beginning of the nightmare. That night, a storm knocked out the power at the lodge. I was in the main room, lighting candles and stoking the fire when it happened. The flash of lightning lit up the room, and I saw Walter standing by the window. In that brief moment of light, he didn't look right. His arms seemed too long, hanging down past his knees. His face was smooth, like clay that hadn't been fully shaped. And just for a second, I swear I saw something move under his shirt that didn't look like a normal back or shoulders. When the lights came back on a minute later, Walter looked normal again. He smiled at me, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. I couldn't sleep that night. I took out my old camera, the one I'd used, to try documenting the renovation work. In the morning, I developed the photos I'd taken during the power outage. What I saw made my hands shake so bad, I dropped the pictures. Walter wasn't alone in looking wrong. The photos showed 3 of the 5 guests, Walter, Jim, and Bill, as something else. Their bodies were skinny and pale, stretched out like taffy. Their faces had features in the right places, but they weren't human faces. They looked like something trying to copy a person without really understanding how we're put together. Part bug, part deer, part something I had no name for. I had to be sure I wasn't going crazy. I set up a tape recorder in the library. then asked Walter to help me move some furniture. While we worked, I got him talking about his life back in Osage, Chicago. The voice on the tape later was perfect, exactly like the real Walter would sound. But underneath, when I turned the volume all the way up, there was another sound. A clicking, chittering noise that no human throat could make. Later, that day, heavy rain washed away part of the ground behind the old mess hall. Kaiser started digging frantically at the exposed earth. I pulled him away and began digging myself. What I found was a nightmare. Bodies, dozens of them, piled on top of each other in a mass grave. Some looked recent, others were just bones. But all of them had been eaten, I guess you could say. Not like an animal would eat, taking everything. These bodies were missing specific parts. Eyes, tongues, brains, vocal cords, the parts we use to see and speak and think and be ourselves. I threw up right there in the rain. When I looked up, Walter was standing at the edge of the hole watching me with those empty eyes. I pretended. I hadn't seen what I saw. I covered the grave back up and told Walter it was just an old trash pit. I'm not sure he believed me, but he let me walk away. That night, I hid in the woods and watched the lodge through binoculars. What I saw will haunt me forever. Walter, Jim, and Bill came out after midnight. They moved differently now, jerky and too fast like spiders. They split up and each made different noises. Walter called out in a perfect copy of my voice. Jim made sounds like a wounded deer, and Bill whistled like the birds in our woods. A few minutes later, the two guests who were still normal, Ed and Tom, came out of the lodge, each responding to a different call. The creatures grabbed them so fast I barely saw it happen. Just a blur of two long limbs and then they had them. The things spit something onto Ed and Tom that made them freeze in place, unable to move, but still awake and aware. Then the eating began. Not all at once, but slowly, carefully. The creatures took only certain parts, leaving the rest untouched. And the whole time, Ed and Tom were awake, their eyes moving in terror. I must have made a noise because Walter suddenly looked in my direction. I ran deeper into the woods and didn't stop until dawn. When I finally got up the courage to return to the lodge, all 5 guests were sitting at the breakfast table like nothing had happened. But now I knew that none of them were human anymore. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I broke into the old logging camp office, searching for records. In a locked file cabinet, I found a leather journal kept by the foreman back in 1937. The writing started normal, daily logs of timber cut and men working. Then came an entry about finding an injured man in the woods. They brought him back to camp, but he wouldn't talk, just stared at them. After that, men started disappearing one by one. The foreman's handwriting got shakier with each entry. The final page just said, "They're not men. They steal your face and voice. Don't trust anyone. They want us all." I realized then what had happened. This thing, whatever it was, had come to the logging camp in 1937, pretending to be human. It had slowly replaced every man there, one by one, until the entire operation was run by these creatures. Then they started up again, acting normal, to the outside world, while building whatever this was, a nest, a colony, a hunting ground. That night, I watched from a hidden spot as Walter finally showed his true self. He was alone in his room when his whole body seemed to come apart and reform. What stood there wasn't human at all. A tall, pale thing with too many joints in its limbs and a face that could shift and change like liquid. The truth hit me all at once. Every guest in my lodge was one of these things. They'd taken the real men on that very first night and had been pretending ever since, waiting for more victims to arrive. I crept to the northern section of my property, the part behind those carved posts. There, hidden among the trees, I found a hole in the ground. It led to a chamber beneath the earth. Inside, carefully hung on the walls like trophies, were human faces, hundreds of them, somehow still soft and lifelike. Along with each face were voice boxes, eyes, and pieces of brain, all somehow kept alive and ready to use. As I stared in horror, I heard movement behind me. I turned to see Tom, or the thing pretending to be Tom, dragging the real Ed's body into the chamber. Ed was still alive, his eyes wide with terror as the creature began to peel away parts of him, absorbing them into its own shifting body. I knew then I was the only real human left at Black River Hunt Club. And these things, these mimics, knew that I knew. I ran from that underground chamber as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. Back at the lodge, I locked myself in my room and pushed a heavy dresser against the door. Kaiser whined softly, sensing my fear. "We need to get out of here, boy," I whispered, petting his head. When morning came, I packed a small bag with food, water, my hunting knife, and a compass. I tried to act normal at breakfast, nodding to the 5 guests who watched my every move with hungry eyes. "Going to check the trails today," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Storm probably washed some of them out." I got in my truck and drove down the long dirt road that led to town. After 3 miles, the trees started looking familiar, too familiar. I realized with growing horror that I was somehow heading back toward the lodge. I turned around and tried again, taking different forks in the road, but every path led back to Black River Hunt Club. I abandoned the truck and tried hiking straight through the woods, using my compass to keep heading south. After 4 hours of walking, I emerged from the tree line and found myself staring at the back of the lodge. It was impossible. I'd walked in a straight line away from the property. The creatures had done something to the land itself, bending space, so there was no way out. That night, I studied the old foreman's journal more carefully. There were drawings of the wooden posts I'd found forming that circle in the northern woods. According to the foreman, those posts were put there by the local Ojibwe tribe long ago to keep the skin thieves contained. When the logging company cut down some of the posts to clear land for their camp, they accidentally broke the seal that had kept these things trapped for centuries. I needed weapons, something to fight back with. The guns in the lodge wouldn't work. I tried shooting one of the creatures once while it was feeding, and the bullet just made a hole that closed up right away. I remembered how my camera had shown their true forms. There was something about certain kinds of light they couldn't hide from. I gathered every flashlight and lamp I could find and started experimenting, covering them with different colored cellophane and filters. I discovered a specific shade of blue-green light that made the creatures flinch. Under this light, they couldn't hold their human shapes as well. Their skin would ripple and show what was underneath. Next, I tried sound. I noticed they avoided the old record player when certain classical music was on. Through trial and error, I found specific combinations of notes that seemed to hurt them, making them cover their ear holes and back away. Most interesting was their reaction to certain words and phrases. When I casually mentioned some Bible verses during dinner, Walter choked on his food. None of them could repeat religious sayings without stumbling over the words. It was like their stolen human parts wouldn't cooperate when trying to mimic faith. Also noticed they didn't see colors the same way humans do. A bright orange hunting vest I hung by the back door seemed invisible to them. They'd walk right past it like it wasn't there. Using what I'd learned, I created makeshift weapons, flashlights with blue-green filters, a tape recorder loaded with the musical patterns that hurt them, bright orange markers to create blind spots where I could hide things they couldn't see. While making these preparations, I found something else strange. The lodge itself was changing. Doorways had moved since yesterday. Rooms were different shapes. The hallway that used to lead to the kitchen now ended in a storage closet. The creatures were reshaping the building to suit themselves, making it less human and more like whatever they were. One night, as I was setting up a blue light trap in the basement, Walter found me. But he didn't attack. Instead, he spoke. His voice, a strange mixture of human sounds and clicking noises. "We know what you're doing, Frank Patterson," he said. It won't work. We've been here longer than your kind. I stood my ground, holding the blue light pointed at his chest. What? Are you? Walter's face rippled, parts of it shifting like liquid while other parts stayed human. We are the first hunters. We were here before humans walked upright. Your people called us many names, skinwalkers, doppelgangers, the people of the woods. Why, are you doing this? I asked, my voice shaking. We feed, we survive, we replace. His head tilted at an impossible angle. We take only what we need to become. The rest we leave. We are efficient. Over the next few days, more of them spoke. To me, they seemed curious about my attempts to fight back. They explained they weren't individual creatures like humans. They were parts of one big organism, each person, like a finger on a hand rather than a separate being. They showed me how they experience the world, seeing time not as a straight line, but as a circle, sensing things beyond what human eyes could see, moving through space in ways that defied normal laws of physics. Most terrifying was when they revealed they'd been living alongside humans for thousands of years, taking a small percentage of us as food while influencing our stories and myths. All those old tales of creatures that steal faces or replace loved ones. They weren't just stories, they were warnings. I found the boundary markers again and studied the symbols carved into them. Some matched drawings in the foreman's journal. These were ancient technologies, a kind of fence that had kept the mimics contained to this small area for centuries until the logging company accidentally broke the circle. I realized I had one advantage. They didn't fully understand humans. They could copy our bodies and voices perfectly, even access our memories. But things like faith, art, and certain emotions confused them. They couldn't replicate these things because they couldn't understand them. As my attempts to escape repeatedly failed, I was faced with an impossible choice. One night, all 5 of the creatures gathered in the main room of the lodge. The one wearing Walter's face spoke for the group. Winter comes soon, it said. We must hibernate, without food. What does that have to do with me? I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. 2 choices for Frank Patterson, the thing said, its face shifting slightly as it spoke. Be our keeper, find food for us, or be our food for winter sleep. They wanted me to become their accomplice, to maintain the lodge, to bring them victims, to help them hunt. The alternative was becoming their next meal, kept alive and aware as they slowly consumed the parts of me they found useful. As I looked into 5 sets of hungry, inhuman eyes, I realized I had to make a decision that would change everything about who I was and what I might become. I spent that night alone in my room, thinking about my choices. Neither one was something I could live with, but I had to pick one if I wanted to live at all. The next morning, I went to find Walter, or whatever was wearing Walter's face. I have another idea, I said. A deal. The thing tilted its head, interested. We listen. I'll help you, I said, the words burning in my throat. I'll keep the lodge running. I'll bring people here, but not just anyone and not too many. The creatures gathered around me, their stolen faces showing no emotion. I'll fix up the hunting lodge like I planned, I explained. Make it fancy, exclusive. But I'll be careful about who I invite. People who won't be missed right away. People who maybe deserve what happens to them. God forgive me for what I was saying. But I was trying to save myself and maybe limit the harm these things could do. How would you choose? Asked the Jim thing, its voice perfectly human despite what lurked beneath. Bad people, I said simply. Men who hurt others. Criminals using hunting trips as alibis. Rich guys who think they can get away with anything. The creatures looked at each other, communicating in some way I couldn't understand. Finally, Walter nodded. Acceptable, it said, but we need connection to ensure loyalty. Before I could ask what that meant, Walter stepped forward and pressed his hand against my chest. Pain shot through me like lightning. I felt something cold enter my blood, spreading through my body. When it was over, I could feel them in my head, not reading my thoughts exactly, but aware of me, connected to me. I could sense them too, like shadows at the edge of my mind. "Now we are bound," Walter said. "You are still human, mostly, but part of you is us now." I felt stronger, my senses sharper. When I cut myself chopping wood the next day, the wound healed in hours instead of days. But I knew I'd given up something important, some piece of my humanity was gone forever. I set to work restoring the boundary system. I fixed the broken posts, carved the right symbols, and performed the rituals described in the foreman's journal. This wouldn't get rid of the creatures, but it would keep them contained to my property. No one else would have to deal with them, spreading further. Over the next year, I developed a system. The lodge operated normally during summer, hosting families and regular hunters. No one disappeared during those months, part of our deal. When fall came, I switched to exclusive private bookings. That's when I'd bring in the kind of people the creatures could feed on. My first targets were easy to find. A banker who'd stolen from his clients' accounts and needed a place to hide out. A businessman who'd abused his wife so badly she was in the hospital. A lawyer who helped murderers walk free. I told myself they deserved what happened to them, that by feeding these monsters the worst of humanity, I was doing some kind of justice. The creatures kept their part of the bargain too. They stayed hidden during normal operations. They limited their feeding to the men I selected. And they kept me alive and healthy, my body aging slower than normal because of whatever they'd put inside me. As the years passed, I got better at spotting potential targets. Men with too much money, who asked no questions about the exclusive, off-the-books hunting weekends. Men with darkness in their eyes, who treated the staff like dirt. Men who talked too openly about the things they'd gotten away with after a few drinks. But something was happening to me too. The line between deserving and undeserving victims started to blur. A man who was merely rude became bad enough. Someone who asked too many questions became a necessary loss. The standards I'd set to keep my conscience clean slowly eroded. By the 1970s, the lodge had a reputation among a certain crowd. A place where you could do anything, no questions asked. And among another crowd, those who notice when people disappear, it had a different reputation. One that brought occasional investigators sniffing around. Those investigators rarely left. In 1975, I realized I was getting too old for this work. Despite my slowed aging, I needed someone to take over when I was gone. I found him in James Carey, a Vietnam veteran with haunted eyes and skilled hands. A man who had seen the worst of humanity and come back broken. A man who, like me, might be willing to make a terrible bargain to find purpose. I trained him slowly, letting him see small hints of the truth before showing him more. By the time he understood what really happened at Black River Hunt Club, he was already halfway to accepting it. "They're not human," he said, the night I finally showed him the creature's true form. But then, after what I saw in the war, I'm not. Sure, humanity is worth saving anyway. I saw myself in him, the way I'd been at the beginning, making excuses, creating a moral framework that let him live with monsters. The worst part? I understood now that the creatures had planned this from the start. They didn't need me to find them food. They'd hunted humans for thousands of years without help. What they wanted was understanding. By living among us, by having me select their victims, they were learning how humans think, how we justify things, how we draw lines between right and wrong, and then gradually erase them. In 1988, 30 years, after I'd made my deal, I felt myself changing more rapidly. The connection between me and the creatures had grown stronger year by year. I could hear their thoughts now. I could see through their eyes sometimes. Parts of my body didn't look quite right in the mirror anymore. The Walter thing, which had barely aged in 3 decades, came to me one night. "It is time, Frank Patterson," it said. "You have served well. Now join fully." I knew what it meant. They wanted to take me into their collective mind, absorb my consciousness while keeping my memories and understanding of humanity. I would become one of them, but the part that was me would remain, guiding them with human knowledge. I thought about fighting, about finally saying no. But 30 years of compromise had worn away any resistance I might have had. And part of me was curious. What would it be like to shed the limitations of human form, to join something ancient and patient and eternal? On a cold autumn night in 1988, I walked into the woods behind the lodge. 5 shapes waited for me there, not wearing human disguises anymore, but in their true forms, tall, pale things with too many limbs and faces that shifted like fog. Took one last look at the lodge where James was welcoming a new group of wealthy clients. Among them was a sharp-eyed woman who called herself a journalist, but whose questions suggested she might be investigating the disappearances linked to Black River Hunt Club over the decades. As the creatures surrounded me, their cold limbs reaching for my face, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that my long vigil was ending, sadness for what I'd become. The last human thought I had was a hope that the investigator might be smart enough, brave enough, to end what I had allowed to continue for 30 years. But even as I thought it, I knew the creatures would be ready. For her, after all, I had taught them everything they needed to know about how humans think, how we plan, how we hope, how we fear, and now I would be teaching from within. As the cold spread through my mind and my body began to change, the boundary between Frank Patterson and the ancient consciousness of the mimics faded away. We became one, and the hunger that had been their defining trait for millennia became mine as well. From the trees, we watched the lodge, my lodge, where the hunting would continue, where humans would come, never realizing that they were not the hunters, but the prey. And we waited for nightfall, when the feeding would begin again.